have these two.
That's it.
And then 2 in January.
The National Association of Home Builders. I think the local chapter is called BASF. It's a free membership on the share if you have new students, $500 like that. So he sent the first service. No, I don't want it. And it was like just all the dates. You saw that? Whoa, that's inception. This is is this the camera record? It's recorded. Awesome.
Morning.
How are you?
So let's see. Anthony, is he here? Nope. Okay, Miriam's here. Yes. Okay. Brandon is here. Yep. James Carter. Yep. Okay. Isabel Charles. Isabel's not here. Okay. Alexander Cohen. Not here. Okay. Dara's here. Where'd you go? There you are. All right. Mo, is he here? Nope. Don't see him. Okay. Marcella. There you are. In front of him. All right. Okay. Evan's not here.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, there you are.
Just got on right now.
Okay. Let's see. Liliana? Good. Liliana Felice? No. No. Okay, sorry. Cynthia? No Cynthia. Okay. Christina, she's not here. Jeff is here. Okay. Lee? Not here. Okay. Woody's here. All right, Nathan Johnson, right here. Where? Oh, where you are. Okay, Ryan's here. Aaron, no. Okay, Michael Lane, nope. Okay, Ramses, okay. All right, Bullshit, okay. Daphne's here. Adriana? Okay. Juliana? Yeah, there you are. Okay. Michael Oshman? Oh, there he is, right there. Perfect time. All right, keep that up. Yeah, all right. Angelo, where did he go? There you are. Okay, Jack Pierre? Nope. Okay, Andre Reed? Nope. Marilyn Samity? Okay. Spalding, don't see him. Alana Stewart? Alana, okay. Oslin? Yep. Kyle, I saw him. There he is. Okay, Max Van Noppen, where'd he go? Oh, not here. And then Bianca. Or Blanca. Blanca. All right. So, anybody who didn't call their name? Okay. All right, the A students have arrived, the B students are still on their way apparently. All right. It's 7:59, we still got 1 minute. All right, any questions before we get started?
We're going to meet here every week?
Yes, we are. Where did you expect we're going to be? All right, it's officially 8 o'clock. Okay, let's get started. So, the real estate finance class, what is this class all about? This is predominantly all about the lender's perspective, okay? In the real estate investments course, we look at everything kind of from the borrower's perspective, from the investor's perspective, kind of from the developer's perspective, but in this course, everything is looked at pretty much from the lender's point of view, okay? We're looking at the debt side of the business, okay? So what we're going to do is this first session, we're going to kind of give you a little bit of an overview of some things, and then we're going to delve directly into using the financial calculator. Okay, so those of you that did not bring one, make sure you grab one up here. I brought a couple of extras just in case. but we're going to be spending quite a bit of time, obviously, how to use the financial calculator. Then for those of you that are going to be here this afternoon, then that session will be dedicated to using Microsoft Excel for the purpose of basically the same sorts of things that we're doing with the calculator. Okay, so it's a good companion class with this in the sense that pretty much what we do in the morning, then in the afternoon we get to do it with Excel. It's effectively kind of what happens, although there's a little bit of overlap and in some cases maybe not so much. But the point being is the morning class is 100% focused on how to use the financial calculator and kind of getting through a number of sort of time value of money calculations pretty much from the perspective of the lender. Now, let's sort of start out with some fundamental kind of basic issues as it relates to real estate and to the valuation of commercial real estate. One of the things I typically like to start with is something I refer to as REE, okay? It's a very basic model, but at the core, REE is what we build almost everything from, all right? It's the super simple, very easy to remember kind of model that ultimately, like I said, everything kind of builds from. Well, in this case, income is going to be our annual net operating income off of our property. And we don't know what that is yet, so that's okay. We're going to get to that. All right? Our R is effectively going to be our cap rate or our rate of return we want on a property. And the V is basically going to be the value. This could be market value, could be investment value, could be, you know, a whole different slew of different types of value, but in essence, it's going to be the value for a property. All right? Now, to get to these numbers that we're going to put into this very simple model, what we're going to do is we're going to start constructing an income statement. Okay? So pretty much every single property that you're going to look at is going to have a cash flow, all right, associated with it. Now, when we're talking about commercial real estate, this is very different than traditional sort of single-family, owner-occupied residential, okay? That model is a totally kind of perception-driven kind of model that doesn't really fit within the paradigm of what we're here to really focus on, which is a lot of the sort of the financial skills and the analytical skills that go into giving a property value. And so we're really going to be looking at income-producing properties only. So let's just sort of take a very simple kind of case study approach to this and say that we've got a little apartment complex that we want to kind of construct an income statement for. So first of all, tell me, how many units do we want this apartment complex to have?
10.
10?
8. 10's fine.
Okay, 10? I didn't hear you. Okay, 10 units. Well, the math would be easier if nothing else for 10. Okay, so it's going to have 10 units. We're going to keep it simple and sort of assume that they're all basically the same size, okay? So what rental rate do we want to have for each of these 10 units on a monthly basis? $2,500. So these are going to be nice units, okay. All right, $2,500 per month. Okay, so let's just start with this base level assumption, all right? And then we'll kind of work through the other assumptions as we kind of get to them. So the first piece of the model is what we refer to as PGI, or potential gross income. All right? Now the way to think about potential gross income, this is the maximum amount of annual revenue that the property would generate if 100% occupied. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? Yes or no? Okay, so what we're going to do to get that number is we're going to take, very simply, the 10 units times $2,500 per month. Well, that's going to give us $25,000. That's not the number we're going to use, because that number is a monthly number, okay? So we need to annualize it, multiply that by 12, and that's going to give us $300,000. Okay, so once again, we were to get $25,000 here, times 12, or $300,000 as our potential gross income, okay? Everybody comfortable with that? Okay? All right? Now then, from that, what we're going to do is we're going to subtract out vacancies and collection losses, okay? What is the difference between a vacancy and a collection loss? A vacancy means it's not occupied and you're not generating rent off of it, whereas a collection loss is somebody's in the unit but you're not getting income. They're basically a deadbeat tenant, okay? Not paying their rent. All right, so once again, let's write that out. Vacancies and collection losses. All right, so usually, you know, this is the sort of thing that, you know, if we're looking at this very specific property, we probably have a historical perspective of, well, how did it perform over the past several years with regard to vacancies and collection losses. If it's a brand new property, then we've got to think about also another aspect, which is lease up. You know, how long is it going to take us to get the property fully occupied, you know, until we get to a sort of stabilized income, all right? But also, we want to take a look at market information. You know, what are similar properties within this particular market? What are their rent levels? What are their vacancy rates? That sort of thing. So let's just say, for simplicity's sake, we're going to go with a 10%, right up here, 10% vacancy and collection loss, all right, to keep the math simple. All right, so 10% vacancy and collection loss on an annual basis, that is going to mean $30,000 as a loss from vacancies and collection losses. Okay, everybody cool with that? Yeah. All right, this will speed up, trust me. Okay, for those of you that are bored to tears, it will speed up. All right, then we add in other income. All right, so give me some examples of other income.
Parking fees.
I'm sorry? Parking fees. What else?
Laundry.
Washer dryers, billboards. What else?
Restaurant.
Well, that's what's a restaurant, because restaurant would then be done differently. We're talking here for an apartment community. What other kinds of revenue generating kind of items might you have?
Utility income.
Possibly utility income, if it's not all obviously directed toward the individual units. I'm sorry?
Handyman income?
Yes. Virtually anything that you can imagine that is non-core rental income gets classified as sort of this other income. All right? So in this case, we're just going to pop out a number, let's just say 50 grand a year, all right, of other income. So a substantive amount, all right? So we'll do the math on that, and that is going to give us our effective gross income. All right, so 30,000 minus 30,000, I'm sorry, 300,000 minus 30,000 plus 50,000 is going to give us 320,000 as our effective gross income, okay? Now, another way of thinking about effective gross income, just to kind of put it in your memory as to what it really means, this is the real hard currency that you've got coming into this property on an annual basis. Does that make sense? In other words, this is the amount of money that's really flowing through into your bank account on an annual basis, all right, to be able to pay your bills from. Okay, so that next step is paying the bills, all right? So from this, we're going to subtract out total operating expenses. We're not going to itemize here, but we're going to talk about the itemization. Okay, so operating expenses for a residential property, this is going to be everything from property management fees that you're going to have to pay to, in some cases, common area utilities, property taxes, insurance, landscaping, you know, any and all items that you are going to be responsible for as an expense for this property are going to be included here in this one singular line item, total operating expenses. Now, for simplicity, in our particular case, we're going to sort of say that's going to be, let's say, 35% a year of EGI. So I'm just going to kind of write that down here as an assumption. So total operating expenses are going to be equal to 35% of EGI. Okay? Now, what you're going to find is that with every property, that's going to vary, okay? And that's going to be, once again, part of the market research that you're going to be involved in. What are other competing properties spending on operating expenses? You know, are they passing those expenses directly onto their tenants? Are they actually paying those and not being reimbursed for those expenses? So there's a lot of different ways that's going to be dealt with, but right now, that's not going to be our focus. Right now, our focus is simply looking at the numbers. So in this case, 35% of the $320,000. So that should be $112,000. Okay, as our total operating expenses. Everybody good with that? Okay. All right, so at this point, what we're going to do is take that $320,000, subtract out the $112,000, and that's going to leave us with $208,000 of the number that we are probably most concerned with, which is our net operating income. Okay, on an annual basis. So this number basically represents, one way to look at it, if the owner had paid cash for this property, in other words, they'd not taken out any loans, no debt, no borrowing whatsoever, had just paid cash money for the property, this would be the dollar amount on a pre-tax basis that they would get to keep. Does that make sense? Okay? And part of the reason why this net operating income number is so important is because whenever you're trying to compare one property to another property, this is the number that's going to make the most sense to compare. And the reason is because everybody's debt situation is going to be different. Everybody's tax situation is going to be different. Okay? So the only way that you can really kind of compare apples to apples from one property to another property is to really look at this net operating income number. But having just said that, that number can be pretty easily manipulated, okay, both up and down, all right? And we're going to kind of get to that here in a minute, but just a couple of other quick little things, just to sort of, as we're sort of going down the income statement, the next line item that we're going to be looking at in this class is annual debt service. It's all about the loan. Okay? And what the actual payment would be on that loan on an annualized basis. And once we've got that, we're not going to do that calculation right now. Once we've got that, then we get something that we call before tax cash flow. And for this course, that's about as far as we go with respect to the income statement. In the investments course, we go into the pieces that get into the income tax implications, we get into the deal structuring and the payouts to the investors and all of that sort of wonderful stuff. But in this course, we pretty much stop with before tax cash flow. Okay, does that make sense? All right. Now, so let's go back here just for a second to this net operating income number. So this is the number that we would basically pop up here as our annual NOI, okay, off of the property. So this is the amount of income that's generating on an annual basis. And we're trying to figure out what we think is a decent valuation for this property for us, okay? Well, first of all, we've got to sort of take into consideration what the cap rate is or what our required rate of return is. And you're going to kind of see the difference as we sort of delve a little bit deeper into this. But right now, let's just say the cap rate is, I don't know, give me a number. for,
6%.
I would, yeah, go a little bit higher, yeah. So 8% seems like a reasonable number, maybe a little bit lower, but interest rates are rising, so that's gonna impact it. All right, so let's just say we go with 8%. So what that means to get the value on a very rudimentary basis is we're gonna take that 208,000 and we're gonna divide it by the 8%, and that's gonna give us the value, okay? So the simple way to kind of look at this model in terms of the way that you're sort of solving is you pretty much put your hand over the piece that you're solving for and then just look at how the math sort of flows. So 208,000 divided by 8% is going to give us the value. If we had a number for the value and you were solving for cap rate, you would take the annual NOI divided by the value. That's going to give you the cap rate. And then the final piece is if you're looking for the annual NOI, you're simply taking the cap rate times the value. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay? Now, so doing that, the 208,000 divided by 8% gives us about 2.6 million for the valuation for this property, okay? Everybody with me on that? Now, am I saying that's a legitimate valuation? No. What I am saying is that based upon the income that the property is generating and based upon that cap rate, that would be the derived value. Now, this is where we begin to kind of tinker with some of the assumptions and begin to kind of think about, what if we change this, what if we change that, how does it effectively modify everything? All right? So let's say that we're going, I think everyone in here would agree, obviously interest rates are going up. They already have been going up and they're going to go up more. Okay, everybody's in agreement with that, yes or no? Okay, so let's just say that right now the cap rate is legitimately 8%, and that is, while it's not directly pegged to interest rates, pretty much indirectly it is. Okay, so as interest rates go up, cap rates go up because you demand a higher rate of return as an investor to keep up with other alternatives that are out there in the marketplace, okay? So, let's just say that interest rates ultimately influence your cap rate, and the cap rate goes up by another 0.2%, and it goes up to basically 10%, okay? It goes up 2% to 10%. So what is that going to do to your value? It's going to lower it. You take that 208,000 and you divide it by 0.10 or 10%, your value has now dropped to $2,080,000. Okay? That's a pretty significant drop. I mean, that's, you know what, $500 and something thousand of a drop in value just because of interest rates going up. Okay? So whenever you hear people, they talk about, oh my God, you know, interest rates are going up, you know, this is really bad for real estate. This is what it sort of translates into in the sense that investors are demanding a higher rate of return, but on the flip side, what that also means, they're willing to spend less for the property up front, because they spend less up front. If the income is staying constant, that's the only way they can raise their rate of return on the property. Okay, does that make sense? It's a fundamental sort of foundation for everything that kind of, as we sort of begin to move forward with this stuff. All right, any questions up to this point? All right, now let's talk a little bit about kind of some of the manipulation aspects of this. So let's assume that you're Max here and you own this property of the 10 units, and it's, you know, been generating this $2,500 a month and so forth. And, you know, he's at a point where he wants to sell the property, and you're trying to independently value the property, and you've kind of gone through all of this. But then you begin to sort of question, well, is the $2,500 a month that he's charging for these units a legitimate rental rate? Okay? And what I mean by that is, are other similar properties within that same market, are they generating relatively close to that same $2,500 a month? And what you discover is maybe they're not, okay? Maybe they're generating less, okay? And that somehow Max has managed to put together a situation of where he has leases where possibly what he did was he gave away some free rent on the front end, but yet with 2 or 3 months of free rent, then raises the actual rental rate for the units so that what it looks like is $2,500 a month, but the reality, if after you factor in basically that free rent on the front end, it may only be $2,100 a month. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay? And so you have to kind of, independently be able to kind of verify what that appropriate rental rate is. So it's a fundamental, very first thing you want to take a look at, especially with residential, but also it's true with commercial, where property owners on a routine basis give away free rent on the front end, and part of the reason for doing that is not only to get the property occupied, but also to kind of project this image the property is really doing better than maybe what it really is. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay? There's nothing illegal with giving away free rent, and there's nothing inherently illegal in saying that the current rental rate for the property is $2,500 a month. What is illegal is if the books have been cooked and showing that effectively that the $2,500 was achieved for the entire rental term. Okay? Does that make sense? All right? Now, vacancies and collection losses. This can kind of be, sort of a weird, tricky thing as well, because, as we sort of said, you could have a situation of where, you have a tenant, but they're not paying the rent, okay? And, and making sure that you're properly accounting for that, and that, but another piece to this is, especially with the larger, properties, you pretty much can never truly achieve 100% occupancy, okay? Any of you that have ever worked with any type of rental property, why can you not achieve, for the most part, 100% occupancy? You always have turnover, for the most part, okay? There are a few exceptions. If you've got some long-term 25-year lease with, some, commercial tenant, that is never going to change and they're always going to pay you and that sort of thing, yeah, you can pretty much achieve 100% occupancy. But barring that, the normal, traditional kind of apartments and most retail centers and that sort of thing, you're always going to have a churn and burn, and so as a result, you're almost always going to have some level of vacancy. Now the question is whether or not this has been, influenced in some way by the owner, trying to sort of cover up, past sins, because to a certain extent, giving away free rent, in essence, is also an example of a collection loss. Okay? All right, so just keep that in the back of your mind. This next one is one of my personal favorites, the other income line, because this is where, in some cases, properties that are valued don't always take this other income into account. And the reason is that whenever you have an independent appraiser going out there looking at the property, what they are valuing for the most part, unless their scope of the valuation was different, but for the most part they are valuing the real estate and the income producing nature of that particular property, not all of these other ancillary sources of income. And in some cases, these ancillary sources of income can be huge, okay? Especially, if you have a property that has never taken advantage of these other ancillary forms of income. The example that I like to give, from several years ago, was whenever apartment communities began to discover it made sense to build carports on their properties to protect the people's vehicles from hailstorms or from sorts of, whether snow, ice, whatever. But they would build these the carports, but then they would charge the tenant, you know, a set fee for those carports, you know, as a sort of a parking fee, that if you wanted to have a carport, you had to pay extra. But the part that gets interesting about it is, well, how much more is a person willing to pay for that carport space, and how much does that really contribute to the bottom line of the property, okay? Well, that brings us back to our little model here, okay, with this other income. Think about it like this. If we're gonna stick with our 10% cap rate for mathematics, okay, every dollar of additional income that we generate means what? Tenfold. So in other words, if we can generate one extra dollar a year, that adds $10 to the underlying value of the property. Okay? So imagine if all of a sudden, with our little complex here, that we can add in 10 parking spaces that are covered parking spaces, and we're going to charge them whatever, 20 bucks a month for those covered parking spaces.
I missed it. I missed the, how does it go from 1 to 10?
Okay. So once again, for every dollar of income here, if we had $1 of income here, $1 divided by 10% translates into $10 of value. Okay? So now the example that's what we're talking about, that let's say that we've got 10 parking spaces and we're charging $20 a month for those. So it's going to be obviously 200 bucks a month times 12 months would mean $2,400 a year, correct? Did I do the math right? Okay. All right, so $2,400 a year. All right, so let's just sort of think about this for a second. We go back to our nice little ERV model, kind of clean everything up. That means an extra $2,400 a year of income at a 10% cap rate. How much value have we just generated? I'm sorry, 240,000. Okay? So we've just added $240,000 of income. So $2,400. Oh, that's 24,000. Okay. Somebody said 240. All right. Just listening to the audience instead of doing the math in my head. Okay. Never trust the students. Okay. All right. So $24,000 is the additional value that has been created off of these parking spaces, generating $2,400 a year of extra income. So what that would mean is, if you sort of think about that on a per space basis, okay, well, and obviously the math just happens to be the case, but if obviously we take $24,000 divided by 10 spaces, then that would be $2,400 per space. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, now, another way to sort of think about that is, if we can build these spaces for less than $2,400, we've hit a home run. Okay? If we can spend up to $2,400 and keep our 10% rate of return, but what if it only cost us half of that? Okay? If it cost us half of that, let's say $1,200, then what that really means is that we would be getting a 20% rate of return off of those parking spaces instead of a 10% rate of return.
Is that still assuming that you have 100% occupancy?
Yes. Okay, or all of these spaces are occupied. Yeah. Okay. Good question. All right. Any questions about that? Does that make sense? Okay. It's a simple example, but it's meant to just illustrate the concept effectively of contributed value. All right, or sort of value creation, that you're basically creating something from a very simple sort of investment, okay? All right, moving forward. All right, so that, once again, we talked about the other income. Now then, once again, we go down to our gross income, which we talked about. Okay, operating expenses. So here, we mentioned that these can be a pretty wide variety of expenses. I mean, it could be, as we said, everything from property taxes, not income taxes, but property taxes, maintenance, repairs, utilities, all that sort of thing. But one of the things that I mentioned was whether or not these expenses are passed through to the tenants or not, okay? Now these, as we have them here, these are not being passed through to the tenants. These are basically being paid for by the property owner, okay? Now if we wanted to pass them through to the tenant, we'd have to add a couple of extra line items here, like a cost recovery sort of line and a couple of other things, but for our purposes, I want you to understand that you can have, think about it like this. Whenever you rent an apartment, what do you pay for as a tenant? You typically, almost always, are going to pay for the electricity. Sometimes you pay for the water and sewer, sometimes you don't. If you have gas in the property, you usually are going to pay for the gas, okay? But what else are you paying for, other than just the base rent?
Wi-Fi.
You may pay for Wi-Fi, but that also depends on whether or not it's a package deal from the community itself, or it's something that you're having to pay, okay? What else?
Rental insurance?
I'm sorry?
Insurance?
Yeah, rental insurance, you're definitely having to pay on your own, okay? What else? Probably pet fees or deposits that you're gonna have to pay. But now, you think about commercial properties, and, well, actually, before we switch over to the commercial property, any type of residential that you can think of that would be an all bills paid kind of environment, in other words, where you would not pay the electric as the tenant, you would not pay the water and sewer, you would not pay probably internet, that sort of thing, it'll all be included. A dorm, okay, like a student dorm, all right, where everything is all inclusive, you know, one package price up front, you know, paid, done, you know, and you think about part of the reason that they did that many years ago, two reasons. One is they didn't want to sub-meter every single space, was one reason. And the second reason is, you know, trying to obviously collect that money, you know, in many cases, you know, over the course of a semester on a monthly basis would be a nightmare. So it was just much easier to sort of say, up front, here's the total charge you pay for the semester or for the year, plop it down, done, okay? Now, whenever you get into commercial properties, whether it's, you know, office buildings, shopping centers, industrial properties, whatever it might be, the door is wide open as to who pays for what, okay? And in most cases, it can be negotiable, okay? Once again, depending on the strength of the tenant, depending on the strength of the landlord, depending on the configuration of the property, that sort of thing. But the reason I want to mention this is all things are not created equal as it relates to, basically, you can have one property, one shopping center, where it's an all bills paid environment, okay? You have the owner that just chooses, for whatever reasons, to have complete control over the utility bills and take care of that and pay for all of that, and then just charge a gross rent price to the tenant, and that's the way it works. You have other properties on the polar opposite extreme that, and when I mean really the polar opposite extreme, not just a triple net lease, but what is referred to as an absolute triple net lease. And what that effectively is where the tenant is responsible for everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. If a window gets broken on the property, it's the tenant's responsibility. If the air conditioner breaks, it's the tenant's responsibility. If, you know, graffiti ends up on the outside of the building, it's the tenant's responsibility. You know, if the parking lot needs to be resurfaced, it's the tenant's responsibility. Okay, do you get the picture? Okay, that's the other end of the extreme. Now, having just said that, usually those kind of situations are reserved for these kind of box tenants that are sort of single occupant sort of tenants, like a Walgreens or, you know, some other sort of maybe a restaurant or something that might occupy kind of a pad site where they're sort of isolated in their own little world. But there's a method to the madness as it relates to those, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. Question.
So on those absolute triple nets, do acts of nature and God count too?
In many cases, yeah. I mean, it's pretty much you.
They have their own insurance.
Yeah, they have their own insurance, but part of it, the way that these were meant to be structured, and some of the folks that set these up back probably in the mid-90s, which was when these began to be really super popular, was the idea behind them was that you would have an investor that would buy this property, and they are just getting mailbox money. They do not want to be bothered, talked to, you know, in most cases, they don't even live in the same state, you know, as where the property is even located. They have never seen the property with their own eyes. It is purely a financial investment for them. And so all they want is that mailbox money every month, and so the tenant is, you know, as a trade-off, the tenant gets a lower rent, but they're responsible for everything, okay? Other questions? Okay, I think you had a question right before you left, Ramsey.
Good on you, remember my name. No, I was just looking at your parking count, and I was just gonna mention that it's not worth mentioning, but I'll mention it anyway, just for the
Okay.
The cost of that parking would be more, but if you're just giving an example, so I
Right.
understand that.
Okay, we'll get more detail later.
Yeah,
Okay, right now I'm trying to illustrate the concept of contributed value. Okay, all right. Other questions as we sort of move on through this. So, all right, so once again, the operating expenses is kind of what we spent a little bit of time just sort of talking about who pays for what in the sense of, you know, do we have a gross rent environment where the landlord pays everything, or do we have a net lease environment or an absolute net lease environment where the tenant pays for everything? Okay, and the reality is usually something in the middle, okay, as to who pays for what. And that, as I said, is probably going to be negotiated between the tenant and the landlord, all right? I mean, properties I've owned in the past, I've had some properties where part of the reason why I did it was because of the way the property was metered. And so I just chose to do a gross rent environment, saying I'm going to take care of all of electrical expenses, and I'm going to charge a rent according to that. But what you might also do is have what's referred to as an expense stop. Ever heard that term before? Expense stop, what does it mean?
Is it capital?
For the tenants.
Well, primarily, in my case, I'd be looking at it from my perspective as the owner of the property, and basically telling the tenant that if your utility usage exceeds a certain dollar amount on a monthly basis, then you're going to pay that overage. Okay? That I stop basically paying for that expense, you're responsible for it as the tenant.
How does that relate to not putting meters in? Isn't the point of having a gross?
Part of it, yeah. Part of it would be, now, in this case, if we could determine, yes, that they were using that extra, you know, electricity or water or whatever it might be, it doesn't, now, in the case of where you have a property that is not individually metered, then you really can't do that other than punish everybody all at once, kind of thing, okay?
Yeah, like they have, I just want to give an example I ran into yesterday. There was a municipality that I found out for multifamily properties, it charges a certain amount for the water bill, and then you're billed additionally at a different rate per amount over that. And so that was the example from the utility income that I gave them earlier.
Okay, all right. Moving on. So a couple of just little quick things, and so we'll get into more of this stuff, you know, as we kind of delve into this a little bit deeper. But you know, related to operating expenses, one of the things that you should be doing is when you're looking at a property, whether once again it's an existing property or it's a new property, trying to get a handle on what the average operating expenses would be for a property of that size and quality. Now sometimes it's easy to do because it's a fairly similar property to other properties that are out there, and being able to obtain that information in some instances may be super easy, in other instances maybe not so much. Like for example, some states within the US allow complete disclosure of utility bills, okay? So that you can literally, as an individual, can log on and you can see for any property in that state what the utility bill is on a monthly basis. And so you can get a pretty good, estimation of what the consumption would be for that property relative to another property. Whereas other states, it's all pretty much behind closed doors, can't see that information, can't access it, so sometimes you just have to estimate it or have to find people that are willing to give you that information. So all I'm saying with that is just, be aware that, sometimes it's simply the detective work or the due diligence work, the surveillance work of finding out that information so that hopefully you've got accurate information to be able to use, because you don't want to obviously inflate or deflate that number. You want an accurate number, okay? Now, one other sort of final piece to this, and we'll, like I said, work through problems as it relates to this later, but another thing to sort of think of, we can have two different property owner types. We've got Max over here, that maybe his whole approach to owning and managing properties is to maintain those properties to the absolute utmost standard, spend every dollar absolutely necessary to maintain the quality and the value of the property, okay? Does that make sense? That's one extreme of a landlord. Then maybe you've got, Angelo over here, who takes the opposite approach. Angelo takes the slumlord approach, okay? Angelo is all about making as much money as he possibly can off of that property every single month, every single year, and so Angelo defers a lot of maintenance, a lot of repairs, pretty much puts no money into those properties whatsoever, okay? And over time, what may happen is the value begins to deteriorate, that you may have difficulty keeping the property leased. You may have, other, issues that are sort of fundamentally tied to that. But once again, these are the polar opposites. So the real issue, are you spending too much to keep the property maintained? And are you not spending enough to keep the property maintained? And how that really translates into what the value of that property is, not only today, but also 5 years from now, 10 years from now, what that valuation may be and how it's going to be influenced. We'll work through some problems that will kind of actually illustrate that and then sort of give you a way to sort of think about that. But it's a very important fundamental thing to sort of think about, because it's a reality check of different approaches to ownership, okay? All right, so moving on, we get down to that net operating income number, and so the point that I'm trying to, I guess, illustrate with these little examples is this number is predicated on a bunch of assumptions, okay? Just because you do the calculations doesn't mean this is what the number is going to be next year, okay, for that property. Because part of what we're doing is we're trying to project what the value is going to be, not only next year, but several years maybe into the future. And we're relying in some cases on a lot of historical information that effectively may or may not be completely accurate or may be unduly influenced by whoever the current owner has been. Okay, does that make sense? So you really, I guess what I'm really saying, when you boil it all down, whenever you get this income statement from the owners, you pretty much have to do your own. Throw out everything they've told you and pretty much construct your own and see what you really come up with as a valuation for the property, and take everything that they're telling you pretty much, you're not going to have to take it at completely at face value. You're going to have to do your own investigation. Okay, make sense? Okay, moving forward. All right, so that's a quick little overview in terms of the income sort of aspect of a property. Now what I want to do is now sort of jump in, now that you've kind of got a sense of what kind of numbers we're sort of dealing with and that sort of thing. One of the big components to this is looking at income that we're not necessarily receiving this year, but looking at income that we may be receiving next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and how much that income may be worth to us today, or if we make an investment today in a property and it goes up in value by X number of dollars, what sort of a rate of return does that give us? So those are going to be the kind of problems that we're now going to kind of work through, and then also be looking at mortgages and kind of some calculations associated with that, okay? So we're kind of switching gears, and this is now where we really begin the fundamental foundations of kind of how to use the financial calculator. Okay, so those of you that, once again, don't have a calculator, do not bring one, make sure you get one, because this is where we're going to sort of start with that. All right? Okay, you need to have one for next week. What would the 8 of you that had to borrow one have done if I hadn't brought you? Okay, now, let's sort of take a look at the financial calculator. So, what we're going to do is we're going to start out with some basic sort of calculations and kind of get you familiarized with the calculator. Now, one of the things that I provided you with as a handout in front of you is a set of about 20 or so time value of money calculations. Now, these are worded like I would word them on a quiz or on a test. They're also, I've given you effectively the actual solutions, okay, the calculator keystroke solutions, all right? Now, the way in which I test and the way in which I grade, we kind of go into a little bit of that since we, I don't go over the syllabus per se. So the way this class is structured is you're given a couple of chances to prove yourself, okay? And the way that it works is this week there are no quizzes, okay, for this course, okay? So you're okay for this week. You weren't expected to do anything prior to coming to class other than show up, all right? Next week, we will have a quiz. That quiz will be 10 questions, and it will be based upon the topics contained within the syllabus, and actually in the syllabus, if you look at it, it actually tells you what are the 10 topics that are going to be contained within that quiz, okay? We are going to go over that material today, and we're going to go over some more of it next week. Now, the way the quiz works is the quiz is open book, open notes, not open computer, okay? But it's open book, open notes with a calculator, okay? And so you get a chance to do the quiz and see, how you can do based upon paying attention to the lecture, kind of working through everything as I'm sort of working through it, that sort of thing. If you do well enough on that quiz, there are 3 quizzes that go into a test, okay? So if you do well on those 3 quizzes, then you don't have to take the test, okay? But if you don't do well, or you miss a quiz due to an absence, there are no makeups in this class. Okay, let me make sure that's clear. If you are not here, no makeups, okay? So that's the reason for the structure. All right, so you do the 3 quizzes, you come in, you do the first test. The test, the difference is, it's closed book, closed notes, only your calculator, okay? So the idea, the motivation here, is to pay attention to what I'm doing and to learn it so that you do well on the quiz and you don't have to actually have to take the exam, okay? Does that make sense? But if you don't pick it up the first time around, then you're able to take the exam and replace those 3 quiz grades. Does that make sense? Yes or no? Okay? Now, Woody, after having taken my real estate investments class, is structured fairly similarly. Any insights that you would like to impart to the
Well,
folks here?
number one is I didn't know the calculator, and he had already taught this class, so most everybody knew it but me. And I was coming in after 15 years not going to school, so I was a little nervous, so I did okay on 2 of the quizzes, and one of them I didn't do well, so I had to take the test the first time. Second time is we had a really long formula, and I had 180, and I'm like, oh my God, this is great, I'm not gonna have to take the final. And then I missed 1 step at the very beginning, so I got a 20. So then I had to study again, so it wasn't a fun time for me, but I did learn a lot. So I would say study as much as you can, and learn the calculator, because if you don't have the calculator now, I would highly suggest getting it ASAP, because That's the key to the whole.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
So the key there, and I think, and implicit with what you said, basically the way that I teach the class and the way that I grade the class, I'm tough, but I'm fair. Okay? All right, so, you know, you're gonna be given the opportunity, you know, once again, twice to show and this, you know, to show that you obviously have mastered the material, but, you know, after that second chance, that's it. Okay? And it's all based on the numbers. Okay? And that's another thing that you need to be aware of. In this class, unlike the other classes that you've taken in the program, this is 100% based on the numbers. Okay? Like for example, when you see those questions, those are the kind of questions you're going to be asked. The only number I want is the answer. Okay? I could care less how you got to that answer. Okay? Other than if you cheated. Okay? But outside of that, what matters is getting that answer. This whole business of, oh, it's about the process, it's about, you know, all this. No. What matters is, did you get the right answer? Okay? So if you made a mistake somewhere within the process, you know, it's wrong. But that's what I also am saying. Here's why you're given 2 chances. Okay? So if you screw it up the first time around and you make stupid mistakes, you can hopefully redeem yourself. Okay? Make sense? Okay. Moving forward. All right. So let's just start, and actually these questions, I'm going to sort of vary them up a little bit, but in terms of the topic, this first one is related to compound or future value, okay? And before we actually get into the calculation of the problems, let's take a look first of all at the calculator. All right. So your calculator should pretty much look like the one I've got up here on the screen. And what we're going to do is just kind of talk a little bit about each function and kind of where it is on the calculator so that you get comfortable with it. All right, so across the top row, going from left to right, the N refers to the number of periods. Now, number of periods could be number of months, could be number of years, could be number of days, but for the most part, with all of our calculations, it's going to be typically, almost always, going to be number of months or number of years. Okay? And we'll talk a little bit about how we manipulate that here in a minute. The next one over, interest rate per year. Okay? So this is simply going to be the interest rate that may be charged on a loan or may be earned on an account. Could also be a rate of return that an investment generates, but it is an interest rate, okay? So it's going to be a percent of some sort. Okay, moving over is the present value. And the present value is what the property is worth in today's dollars, okay? So what the property is worth today is the present value. The payment is what is a recurring dollar amount that we are either making or receiving. So the payment can flow both directions, okay? The payment could be, for example, I'm a borrower. I'm making a payment to the lender for a mortgage, okay? But you can also flip that around, and if I'm the lender, I'm the one receiving the payment, okay? And what you're going to see as we get into using the calculator, we're going to have a way of differentiating that. And the way we differentiate it is whether or not it's basically a positive number or a negative number. If it's a positive number, that means it's an income to us. If it's a negative number, it means it's an outflow to us, okay? And then finally, the future value, what is the property worth at some point in the future, or what is the investment worth at some point in the future. Okay? That makes sense in very general terms. Now, the very first thing that I always like to do with the calculator is to just start off with a few fundamental things that you should do at the beginning of every single problem, okay, without exception. The first is the shift clear all. Okay, so on the calculator, the shift key is this orange button. Okay, And then right below that is the clear key, but underneath the clear key in orange is CALL, clear all. You will thank me for this later. All right? Whenever you hit the shift clear all, that clears out everything that's in the calculator in terms of the memory registers, any previous problems that you may have been working on, that sort of thing. Because the way this calculator functions is, let's say that you put in a mortgage problem, you know, and you worked on this mortgage problem, and then you just turned off the calculator. 5 years from now, you pick up that calculator, turn it on, that mortgage problem that you put in 5 years ago is still in there. Okay? So that's why you have to clear it out between every single problem. All right? Now,
Which one shift again?
the orange key. All right? Now, the next thing that you're going to do whenever if you hit the shift and you hold down the clear all key, what should pop up in your display is something like 12p year or 1p year or something like that. Okay? Now this one, it actually, well, it does it kind of over over on the side, but it doesn't really pop it up on the screen. But what that's telling you, this 1p year or the 12p year or something else, is everybody, okay, does everybody's calculator have one or the other? Anybody else having something different? Okay, good. Just out of curiosity, this is not really meaningful, but I'm just kind of curious. How many of yours say 12p year? Okay, how many of them say 1p year? This is not a right or wrong question. This is simply, okay, the point being is, normally whenever you buy the calculator, it's set on 12 payments per year, okay? Meaning that's set on monthly payments, all right? And so usually that means that if it's set on something other than 12, somebody has played around with the calculator, all right? Now, for our purposes, the way to think about this, 12 payments per year means the calculator is set up for monthly payments or monthly income, monthly interest, okay? Whereas if it is on one payment per year, that means yearly or annual, okay? Now, there are two reasons that you would clear the calculator at the beginning of the problem. One is to clear out all the memory registers. The second reason is to see how the calculator is currently set with regard to whether it is monthly payments or whether it is annual payments or something else, okay? Now the something else, I'm just going to kind of gloss over because it really doesn't relate to us, but you could have payments that are made on a daily basis. You could have payments that are made on a quarterly basis. You could have payments that are made once or bi-weekly or once every 6 months or whatever. Most of the time in real estate, that's never going to happen. It's pretty much either it's annual or it's monthly, okay? So we're just going to leave it at that. Now, so those are the two reasons to obviously always do the shift clear all. Now, when you look at a problem, okay, you can go ahead and look at it real quick, but what you should be able to determine from every single problem that you are asked to solve by me, or for that matter, you need to solve, you need to understand whether it's asking for monthly information or it's asking it on an annual basis. Okay, so that should be the next step. So the first step, clear the calculator out. Second step, look for whether it's monthly or whether it's annual or something else. Okay? I'm going really slow to make sure this sinks in. All right. Now, so in this case, let's just start with a relatively simple problem. We'll kind of come back to some of these. So let's just say that we've got a car loan. Car loans are always a good one to start with because everybody kind of is familiar with these. They typically, in many cases, have gotten one. So let's just sort of start off with, we can approach it a variety of different ways, but let's just start off with the way in which the dealership typically approaches it. How much of a monthly payment can you afford? Or how much of a monthly payment do you want, is what the dealership usually asks. So give me a number. 200, okay? All right. So we'll start with that. So $200 a month. All right. Now, how many years do we want this loan to last? 3 years. Okay. All right. And what interest rate do we want? Okay, 2.7. All right. So let's just start with those three pieces of information to get our the value of the loan is what we're actually going to be solving for here. So the first thing, is this going to be monthly or is it going to be annual? Monthly. So what we're going to do is go up here, we're going to put in 12 shift payments per year, okay? Now if you're looking for that and where that's located, on your calculator, 12, and then you're going to hit the shift key, and then right below the PMT key, you see payments per year, P/year, okay? What that does is that is now, for those of you whose calculators were not set to 12 payments per year, now they are set to 12 payments per year. For those of you who were already set to 12 payments per year, it just reinforces it. It's there, okay? All right, so 12 payments per year. Now then, just to once again be safe, make sure it did what you wanted to do, hit that shift clear all. And once again, now everybody's calculator should be set for 12 payments per year, okay? All right, so with the way that we've got the pieces of information here, and these pieces of information can be in any order that we want to put them in, it all boils down to what it is we're trying to ultimately solve for. So in this case, we were told by someone that they wanted a 3-year loan, so you're going to type in 3, and then you're going to hit the shift key, then in, okay? Now when you do that, what you should see pop up in the display is 36. Because what it's doing is it's saying, yeah, I know this is a monthly loan, but you've given me the number of years for the loan, and I'm converting that into months. Okay, so that 3 shift in is basically taking 3 times 12 to give you that 36. Does that make sense? Okay, that's the role the little shift plays in that, okay? Because if you look underneath the N key on the calculator, what do you see? X payments per year, or times payments per year. So that's all it's doing is it's simply taking that 3, multiplying it by 12 payments per year to give you 36 payments. Okay? Make sense? Okay? All right. The $200, okay, now do we want that to be, that's going to be our payment. So that's going to be an outflow from our perspective as the borrower, correct? So what we're going to do is we're going to put that $200 in as a negative payment. Now the way we do that is if you look over here on the side of the calculator, we have a plus minus or a change sign key. Okay, right over here. Okay, what that does is whatever you have in the display, if it's a negative number, it makes it positive. If it's a positive number, it makes it negative. Okay, so it just changes the sign from positive to negative or negative to positive. That's all it does. Now, the reason why we're making this a negative number is from our perspective as the borrower in this deal, we are going to be making payments to a lender. So it is an outflow from our perspective as the borrower, meaning that's decreasing our bank account by $200 a month. Does that make sense? Okay? Then the interest rate, we simply type in the 2.7 and hit the interest rate key. All right? And it automatically adjusts it for the appropriate number of compounding periods, months, years, whatever it might be. Okay? So now we've got the 3 pieces of information that we need for this particular problem to solve for what is the loan amount today, or the present value. Okay? So you put all of this in, you should now be able to just simply hit the present value key, and it should give you a dollar amount for the loan. So let's just do it here real quick. All right, so we've already got the 12 payments per year, but we're going to put it in again, just to, once again, be safe. Clear it out. Okay, 3, shift in, 36 months, 200 plus minus payment. 2.7% interest rate, and then solve for the present value. So we're not going to get a very expensive car with this. Definitely going to be a used one. So 6908.
I think that's a motorcycle.
66. Okay. So that is going to be the dollar amount of the loan. Yes, Ramsey?
Do that again.
Okay. So one thing to help you out here is a little bit. Over here gives you the actual keystrokes that I put in addition to the ones I've written out on the board. So all you're doing is you're starting out with the 12 payments per year. So you're simply typing in the 12, hitting the shift key, then the payments per year. Clear it out with the call key. Then you're going to type in this case, the 3 years, shift in, which is going to give you 36 months. Then 200, change the sign for the payment. Put in the 2.7 as your interest rate, and then all you have to do to solve is simply press present value. Okay? Everybody get it?
Oh. That was like in chorus over there. That's singing.
Okay, wait, shh. All right, all right. I am not putting anything up here on the board that you don't need. Okay? So in other words, when you're putting it into the calculator, you should be putting it precisely the way that I have it written here. Okay? So if you're putting in extra information, you're not putting in other information, that's on you. Okay? You need to make sure that you're putting it in precisely the way that I've got it here. So if there's a piece that you're missing, that you're, like for example, a common mistake would be not putting the shift here whenever you put the 3, in. Because what it would do is then it would say, well, if you didn't put the shift in, it would assume it's only 3 months as the loan instead of 36 months. Okay? But now, here's another thing to point out. The order of these 3 variables does not matter. You could put in the interest rate first, then the payment, then the term. You can put in the payment, then the term, then the interest rate. None of that matters. What matters is the final step, okay? That you're solving for whatever it is that you're solving for, in this case, present value. Yep.
Do you press shift with the 200 and 2.7 as well?
No, you don't need to, because this is only converting this because this is a time variable. This is converting this into the monthly. Okay?
Can you just do it one more time from the beginning?
Okay.
It's important to note that clear all is underneath the C button.
Right. Okay. So once again, all right. So all you're doing is you're just. I mean, I don't really know how to do it other than just. I mean, it's. Okay. So you got 12 payments per year. All right. Now, whenever you hit the shift, you hold down the clear all key. You should see 12 P year in the display. Are you seeing that? Yes or no? Okay. Below. You see that? Okay. So it's set correctly. All right. Then it's simply a matter of typing in 3, then you're going to hit that shift key, and then the N, and it should in the display now say 36. Then you're going to type in 200, change the sign, where it's now a negative 200, hit the payment key, then 2.7, hit the interest rate key, and then once you've done all that, then you should be able just to hit present value, and then you should get the answer of the 6908.66. If you're not getting that, you're skipping something, or, I mean, I don't know what else to tell you. Yep.
In regards to the payment, a payment is always going to be computed as a negative.
No. That's what I'm saying. A payment can be positive or negative depending on the point of view.
Okay.
So, for example, okay, this is a great example. Let's say this is the borrower's perspective, okay? To make this the lender's perspective, to change it, we would not have that.
Okay. You just put 200 in payment.
You put 200 in the payment, but what you would find is now the present value is negative. And the reason the present value is negative from the lender's perspective is what are they doing? They're giving you the $6,900 as the loan, but they're receiving $200 a month as a payment.
Okay, so always for the lender, present value will be negative.
I'm sorry?
Always on for the lender, the present value will always be negative.
Pretty much. Okay. All right. Make sense? Okay. Let's move forward. Okay. Let's do a simple sort of home loan. Same kind of setup, maybe a little bit different. All right. So once again, we're going to say 12 payments per year. Put everything out. All right, so for this home loan, let's say that we go and we find a property that's available for sale. Okay, what dollar amount do we want to?
300.
300,000. Okay. Now, this is just sort of a practical thing, but chances are we are not going to be able to finance the entire 300,000. We're probably going to have to put, 5, 10, 15% down, depending on, or maybe 20%, all depending on our credit history and what loan program we're using, that sort of thing. So let's just keep it simple and say we're going to put down 10% as a down payment. All right, so that's going to be $30,000 down payment, okay? All right, so that means the loan amount is going to be equal to what? 270,000. Okay, is everybody comfortable with that? Yep. All right. Now, so we go over here, 270,000. That is going to be our loan amount today or our present value. All right. So this is once again from the perspective of the borrower. Okay, they are receiving $270,000 from the lender for this property as a loan. Okay. Now, what interest rate are they going to be charged? 5%. Okay. And what term? We want 15, 30 years? What do you want?
15.
15 years. All right. So 15 years. Now, once again, just like in the previous problem, you're going to put it in as 15 shift in, and now it's going to pop up 180. Okay. 15 times 12, 180 payments. Does that make sense? Now, just to sort of point this out, another way you could have put it in, you actually, once again, you're sort of, you know all of that, you could have put it in as just simply 180 in. Same thing. Okay? Because without the shift, it knows that's 180 months. Okay? With the shift, it's assuming this is years and you're going to convert it to months. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay? All right, so now we have the three pieces, in this case, of information that we need, and we want to solve for what is the monthly payment. Okay? Well, this is going to be a negative number, since it's going to be a cash outflow from our perspective as the borrower. So let's just put it in. You should get 21, 35, 14. Okay? As your monthly payment. Okay? Everybody cool with that?
Question.
Yep.
In this class, is present value always going to be associated with loan amount?
Not necessarily. Could be an investment amount. Could be an amount you deposit into an account. Could be the amount that you pay for the property. Could, I mean, so it's not always going to be a loan amount.
Okay.
Okay. Any questions up to this point? All right. Yep.
Why did I get a different answer when I did 15 ed?
Okay. Did you do 15 shift in or 15 in?
15 ed.
Okay. 15 in to the calculator implies it's only a 15-month loan.
Okay.
And so if you were to put that in, then you're going to get some outrageous amount as your monthly payment because the loan's only over 15 months.
Gotcha.
As opposed to over 15 years.
Per year. Gotcha.
Okay? All right, which actually is a good thing to sort of bring up here. All right, so those of you that are actually paying attention, you're actually clued in on this and so forth. What is the total dollar expenditure for all payments for this loan, assuming it's not paid off early?
384. What's the question about?
Okay, one more time. What is the total dollar amount of all payments over the 180 months for this loan that you're going to pay, both principal and interest? What are you going to do?
Monthly payment times
384, 325.
You're going to take this number and multiply it by 180. Okay? So this is the part where people begin to have their minds blown just a little bit. Oops, 325, 17. Okay, so 384, 325, 70. So this number, that represents all principal and interest payments on the loan. So you only borrowed $270,000. So what does that really mean in terms of interest? How much interest did you really pay?
100.
Over $100,000 in interest over that 15 years. Well, you can tell precisely how much you paid if you were to take the 384, 325, 70, and just simply subtract out the actual loan amount.
114, 325.
So 114,325.70.
What percentage of the principal does that actually? 5%? No, it's not 5%.
No, that's a lot more. So divided by, if you were sort of look at it like this, 114,000 divided by 270,000. Oops. 114 divided by 270. So it's about 42%, roughly. Okay?
Glad I did 15-year loan.
Yeah. And what you're going to find is, obviously, the longer the term of the loan, the more interest. Now, see, this is the part that people have a hard time sometimes getting their head around. Because what's happening here is this amortization that's taking place on this loan works in the following way. And we're going to be building amortization schedules and doing all of this, so you're going to see all of this. I'm just trying to introduce you to it in small little steps. But what you're going to see is you start out with a balance up here on the loan of $270,000. So those first few months, you're paying interest on that full $270,000. But over time, as the balance begins to go down, you're paying less and less on in terms of interest, more and more on principal. And so as you get to those final years and final months, you're paying almost exclusively principal payments and not interest payments. Now this is what we refer to as a constant payment mortgage, okay? A CPM, but what you're going to find and what we're going to be doing in this class is you're going to see a whole bunch of other mortgage types. We're going to have adjustable rate mortgages, we're going to have price level adjusted mortgages, we're going to have graduated payment mortgages, we're going to have constant amortization mortgages, and on and on and on, all these different types of mortgages. This is the most common, okay? It's a standard fixed rate mortgage, okay? Yeah, question?
Is that what they consider the interest first loan, so to
No,
speak?
this is, well,
Like they pretty much you're
it's not an
paying
interest only loan, let's put it that
or
way.
interest for, like you're pretty much paying more for the interest.
You
than
are
for
paying
principal.
more in interest up front than you are later on. And so in that sense, yes, but it's not an interest-only loan.
Well,
That's a
interest
big,
first.
big difference.
Interest first loan.
An interest-only loan is where you are only paying interest.
Right.
There is no principal reduction, and we will talk about that. Okay, in detail. Okay, moving on. All right, so just for fun, another little thing we can do here, just to kind of give you a sense of what kind of is going on, is after you've done these sort of calculations, one of the questions that you may want to know is how much interest did we pay, you know, in a particular month or in a particular year. So let me show you how to do that real quickly. So if you kind of go on where we were there, and you were to type in input one, I'm going to explain this, shift, amortize, equal, and equal. I'm going to explain this, so just for a second. Okay. So what we're doing now is we want to access the calculator's amortization schedule for this particular mortgage. Okay? We still have the information in there in the calculator about this mortgage, and so what we were wanting to do, think of it as almost like a database, okay? And you're trying to extract information from the database. In this case, what we are extracting is we want to know for period number one or month number one through period number one, month number one. In other words, just month one, okay? We want to know the amortization information about that loan. We want to know how much principal was paid in that monthly payment, how much of it was interest, and we want to know what our balance is on the loan. Yeah, those are the three equals. So let's just sort of put it into the calculator over here. And so we should be able to do one input. Well, actually, I already cleared mine out. All right. So put everything back in there real quick. So 270,000, 5% interest rate for 180 months. Okay. All right. So we do one input, one shift, amortize, equal. So what we get, the first time we hit equal is negative, oops, 1010, 14. And that is going to be our principal. Okay? You hit equal again, and you hit negative 1125. And that's going to be the interest. You hit equal again, and you get 268, 989, 85. And that's your balance. Okay? So all we're doing here is, once again, we're just going back to our original problem. After, if you've cleared it out since then, that's okay. Just put the problem back in with the 270 present value, 5% interest rate, 15 shipped in, solve the payment, and then just jump on down here, one, input one, shift. Now the amortization key is over here underneath the present value key. I'm sorry, the future value key. So all you're doing is you're hitting the shift, that amortization key, and then hitting equal. And what it should do is pop up in your display principal of 1010, 14 negative, and then you hit equal again, and it gives you the 1125 negative, and then you hit equal again, and it's giving you the outstanding balance on the loan.
I do that then for month 12.
You can do it for any time period of your choosing. So, for example, everybody pay attention to this. So if I ask you what is the total principal paid during the first year, what would you do?
1 through 12.
1 through 12. 1 input 12 would be the first year. Okay, and then shift, amortize, equal, equal, equal would give you the principal, interest, and balance at the end of the first year. Does that make sense? Now, let me complicate it up a little bit. All right, what if I asked you for the second year?
24.
Okay, 24 is going to be the ending number, but what's going to be the first number?
Or 13. 13.
No, 2 would be month 2.
Yeah, 13 through 24.
13 input 24. This is a kicker. Okay, All right. For the amortization, let's just gonna make things clear here. So for year one, it is months 1 through 12. Okay? Yes? For year two, it's going to be 13 to 24. Because if you were to put in 12, 24, 12 is basically December of the first year. Okay? You want to start with January of the second year. Okay? Does that make sense? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay? This is something you need to commit not only to memory, but this needs to be just instinctive. Okay? So year three, 25 to 36, year 4, 37 to 48, year 5, 49 to 60, year 6, 61 to 72, and so forth, so on. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay? So if I asked you just a simple question, give me the principal and interest and balance for year 5, year 5 only, what are you going to do? 49 input 60. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. All right. Now, what if we want to know the total principal, interest, and balance for the entire loan? What would we put in?
15.
1 input.
72.
No.
180.
180.
180. The loan is 180 months, so for the entire 15 years total would be months 1 through 180. Okay, so let's just do that just for fun. So we do 1 input, 180, shift, amortize, equal, equal, equal. What we should see is we have a balance of 0, but we also, in terms of principal, you should probably see 270,000, and the interest of the 114, whatever it was that we had gotten previously, the
Do we have to clear that out?
325.
Move on to this next input part?
No. See, this is one case where you don't want to clear things out. Okay? Okay, everybody pay attention to what I'm about to say here. I just said you don't want to clear things out between each of these. And the reason is the calculator is using all of that problem information. Okay? The calculator basically, like mine up here, look how mine above each of those actually shows you what is in each of the memory registers. Okay? Well, yours doesn't show you that, but that's what's effectively in each of your memory. 180, 5, 270, negative 2135. Okay? That's what's in your calculator and what needs to be there in order for the calculator to be able to draw down for any period of time that you choose. And the way I phrased this earlier is think of it as if it's a database. That you're extracting information from the database for this particular set of variables. And so in this case, we're simply extracting for the first month. Here we would be extracting for the first year. Here we would be extracting for the 4th year. And here we're extracting for the entire 15 years. Okay, make sense?
Okay, I just did everything you did, and my 370 came out.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's confusing.
I just got it.
Did you get 74 cents as a balance?
Yeah, I was
Yeah, you're gonna get, I mean,
So we have to round back for this?
yeah, don't get overly concerned about the rounding. That is not gonna influence anything of any substance, okay? All right? Now, just out of curiosity, in your calculators, how many decimal places is your calculator carrying out your answer?
6.
Okay. If it is carrying it out to multiple decimal places like mine, that's probably the way you're going to want it. Now, the way to get it from 2 decimal places to something else, or something else to 2, here's how you do it. Okay. To change decimal places, basically you're going to hit the shift key, and you're going to hit the equal key, Because right underneath the equal key is DISP, display. So you're going to shift, equal, and then whatever you want it to round it to. I just normally do 9, just so that it carries it all the way out. Okay, 9 decimal places. But now if you wanted it to be 2 decimal places, you just simply would hit the shift, display 2, and that would make it 2 decimal places. Okay, make sense? Now, as I said, most of the time we're not going to get overly concerned about rounding. There are a few things as we get into very specific rates of return and interest rates where rounding is going to be a little bit of an issue, but for these very basic problems, we're not concerning ourselves too much with that. Okay, so far so good. All right, moving forward. So up to this point, all we're trying to do is get you sort of comfortable with using a calculator, understanding how to put things in. Now, here's the way that you should be looking at this. After 30 years of teaching this, I'm telling you this is what works, and I can tell you what doesn't work, okay? What works is under no circumstances, I don't know how else to say this, under no circumstances should you be trying to memorize keystrokes. That's not going to work for you. You have to understand what information you're being given and how that translates into how you're going to be putting it into the calculator. You've got to understand what the problem is asking for, what the problem is asking, what information is being given to you. You know, if you try to memorize a bunch of keystrokes, like for example, if you work through these sample problems and you're trying to memorize, oh, I put in this, and then I put in this, and then I put in this, no, that's not going to work. Because I'm going to change things up enough to where if you do that, you're not going to get the right answer, okay? You need to understand what is being asked, and you need to be able to understand how to interpret what's being asked and putting it into the calculator. Because here's the point I'm trying to get around to. Is like, you know, assume that you're at a job site, assume that you're in an interview, assume whatever, and you know, you're being asked to calculate something. You need to be able to do that very quickly, you know, and you're saying, oh, no one would ever ask me that at a job interview. Let me tell you, right now, if you're interviewing for any sort of financial analyst job, development analyst job, 99 times out of 100, they are going to give you some sort of a pretest to see if you actually know what you're doing. And within 5 minutes, they can figure out whether you know what you know or you don't, okay? Just like I could very easily give you a quick little test, and I would know, okay, you know it, you don't, you know it, you don't, and be able to discern that. So my point being is, you need to be able to have these skills locked down cold, okay? Now, are you always going to have the HP 10B sitting in your pocket? Unless you're me, probably not, you know? But the way that you can potentially have it with you at all times is, believe it or not, actually you can use it as an app on your phone. You can download an HP 10B app. Now,
For $6.
for $6. But you're not going to be able to use that one on the test. And the reason why is because you can access a lot of other information on a test on your phone. So that's the reason why I don't allow that one to be used, you know, for class. But the point being is, you know, it's a very powerful sort of calculator in terms of what it does. It's an industry standard. It's been used for over 30 years, you know. And actually, this version of the calculator came out in 1987. So it literally came out as I was finishing up, you know, my degree, and the year before I started teaching in 1988.
You have it on your watch?
I don't have it on my watch. But the point being is, you need to be familiar with this, okay? So you need to be able to know how to do these calculations. You need to know how to do them cold. Now, here's the thing. And I'll also sort of say this. While this course is about numbers and it's about calculations, it's not a math course. You know, but the point being is, you're not actually having to do any math. Your head is not having to do any math. What you are having to do is what I would call logic skills, okay? You are having to take bits and pieces of information and then translate that into What do I know? What do I not know? What do I want to know? Okay? So it's not about you being able to actually add and subtract, multiply and divide, and do all these formulas and that sort of thing in your head. That's not what this course is all about. That's not, you don't have to actually do that, okay? All you actually have to do is understand what you're being asked and then be able to logically, deal with that. Now, those of you that are math phobic, you're gonna get over it. I don't know how else to say it. You're gonna have to get over it and realize this is not about math. It's all about just simply taking that information, processing it, and giving an output. Does that make sense? Okay? All right. So, let's move forward with some other problems as we kind of work through these types of problems that we've got. So, one of the first questions here is a future value question.
Are we doing this one?
Yeah, we're going to start with something brand new. Okay? So now we're going to give a couple of different examples of kind of a future value sort of problem. Now, a future value problem simply is implying that we are solving for a future value. Okay? Why might we want to solve for a future value? Okay? We might want to know, based upon a set of assumptions, what a property is going to be worth at some point in the future. We might want to know what a loan balance is going to be at some point in the future. We might want to know if we have put a certain amount of money into a retirement account, how much is going to be there when we retire. Okay? Those are all very legitimate examples of a future value kind of problem. Okay? Now, in terms of the inputs, so let's just take one of those as an example, all right? So let's just say that we buy a property, all right? And now, first of all, I'm asking you, do we want to, if we want to buy a piece of land and then we want to sell it at some point in the future, and do we want to do that on a monthly or annual basis in terms of our rate of return?
Annual.
Okay, we can do it either. Okay, it doesn't matter. It does matter, but it doesn't matter in the sense that you can do it both ways. Okay, so which one do we want to do?
Annual.
Okay, we're going to do annual. All right, so we're going to put in one payment per year. So we're going to start things off. And we're going to clear everything out. All right, so now when you punch in the shift clear all, you should see 1p year. Okay, so now we're sitting on annual compounding. All right. So let's say that we bought a property, let's say many years ago. This is going to illustrate a different aspect of the present value function. Let's say that you bought a property, tell me when, how many years ago?
5 years.
15 years ago, I heard 5 to 15. Okay, so we're going to say 15. All right, so 15 years, and I'm going to still put in the shift, and I want to do that on purpose. If you now hit the shift, or I'm sorry, the 15 shift in, what shows up in your display? 15. Because it's just simply taking 15 times 1 payment per year, so you get 15 total payments, okay? So we bought a property 15 years ago. All right, what do we pay for this property?
$1 million.
Okay, 200 and $1 million, so we'll split that somewhere around, I don't know, let's say 600,000. All right, so $600,000 is what we paid for it. And if we paid for it out of our pocket, once again, no sort of loan, that's going to be $600,000 present value. Now, the question that some of you are going to ask is, wait a second, is that present value or past value or what is that? Well, in this particular instance, what we're basically doing is we're saying, okay, whenever the event took place, it was present value at that time of the event, okay? And in this case, $600,000 was what we paid 15 years ago for a property, okay? Everybody with me? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, now, over the years, the market has gone up, and let's say by a couple of percent each year, all right? So let's just say, give me a percentage that's gone up each year. 2%, 2.5%? 2.5%. 2.5%. So we put in 2.5%. Now this is going to be, instead of an interest rate, this is now going to be a growth rate, okay? because we're saying that we paid $600,000 and it grew in value on average each year by 2.5% each year. All right, so if all of that happened, then all we're going to do is we're going to solve for future value, and that's going to tell us what that property is worth to us after that 15-year holding period. Does that make sense, everybody? Yes or no? Yes. Okay, so let me just pop it into mine here. Okay, so one payment per year. All right, so 600,000 present value, 15 years, 2.5%. Oops, I didn't want to solve the payment. Solve for future value. 868. 89, we'll round it off to 90. Okay? Does everybody understand? Okay, so all we're saying is that property that we bought 15 years ago, $600,000, increased in value by 2.5% a year, is now worth $868,000. Everybody cool with that? Okay, any questions on that? Okay.
Is that the same? Is that the same as calculating? Can you calculate an inflationary rate alongside it?
Well, this is in essence, if you wanted to add an additional, and you could just add another percent or two on top of that.
Okay, just combine it into one.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is sort of assuming part of that is an inflationary rate.
And we did the one at the.
Because we're just simply looking at it as an annual increase each year.
Okay, thank you.
Okay? Now, let me give you another one. This is always one that people struggle with. And that's the impact or influence of a holding period. Okay? What is a holding period? It's how long you own it. Okay? Everybody listening? I see a bunch of people not listening. Okay? A holding period is how long you actually own an asset. That's a very important concept because that length of ownership will dictate very quickly your rate of return. For example, how many times have you heard somebody say, oh, I bought this however many years ago and it's now worth twice what I paid for it. But they say, oh, it's like I've doubled my money and I've got like 100% rate of return. Okay, well, if their holding period was 1 year, that would be accurate. If you bought it at the beginning of the year for $100 and you sold it at the end of the year for $200, that would be a 100% rate of return. Okay, but if you had held it for more than a year, that rate of return starts going down very quickly. Okay, so let me just kind of illustrate this concept. Okay, once again, one payment per year. Clear everything out. All right, so let's just say that we've got an asset that we bought for $100,000. And we sold it for $200,000. And our period of ownership was 1 year, so one in or one shipped in, either way. And we solve for interest rate. You should get 100. So let's just see. Yep. Okay, so your interest rate or rate of return, that 1 year holding period was 100%. Everybody cool with that? Yes or no? Does that make sense? Okay, but this is the part where it starts to get sketchy. let's change that holding period. Instead of 1 year, let's just make it 2 years. So all you do, don't have to change everything, just change this one variable. 2, shift in, resolve for the interest rate. Oops. Okay, hold on. That's not right. No, that's not right. Let me try one of the regular calculators.
41.42.
Yeah, it should be something less than that.
Just 2 years.
Okay. Yep. 41.42 would be the answer. Sometimes this, once again, this is one of the problems with the simulators. They don't always work. So in that case, it's another reason to, once again, stick to the regular calculator. Okay. Let's say that we increase it to 3 years. All I'm trying to do is just sort of show you very quickly how you can just change the assumption on the fly. Okay, 4 years.
See the rule is 72. 4 years is double.
Okay, and we keep going and going and going. So my point being is this. Holding period matters. Okay, it matters a lot. So this person that said, I bought this thing for $100,000 and I sold it for $200,000, the real fundamental question that you really need to know is, how long did you have to own it? If you owned it for a year, that was great, you got a 100% rate of return. But if you had to own it for 4 years, that's only an 18% rate of return. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is, well, how does this relate to real estate? What if you buy a piece of land, but you don't actually get to build on it or sell it to somebody for 5 years or 10 years? Time is money, you know, in the sense that if you have to hold that land for 10 years while entitlements get done and a whole number of other things, that land that you thought, whoa, I'm getting a big, you know, rate of return on this, you know, 10 years later, that rate of return is not going to be so hot. And let's just do it on this one. If you put in 10 years as the term, 7%. It's hardly worth your effort. Okay?
Is that the same for the banks, like if a bank loans gives us a loan, like we showed earlier, where the amount that you actually pay overall for a house loan is, you know, close to 46% in interest overall. But this works in reverse for the bank. Their rate of return over the period of time, 15 or 30 years.
It's whatever their stated interest rate is.
That's right. It's 5% or whatever the rate is.
Right. Unless, and this is where this class comes into play, and you're going to see, if not today, then certainly next week, you're going to see all the different ways the lender makes money in addition to the interest rate. Because they make money, I'll give you this a little precursor. They make money on loan origination fees. They make money on prepayment penalties. They make money on processing fees and servicing fees. You know, so in a whole number of other, you know, sort of issues which we're going to get into, but right now we're not in there yet. Okay. So, but my point with this is I was just saying that I put in 10 years just to sort of see what it would be. In 10 years, that annual rate of return would only be 7.18%. So, as I said, not that great of an investment with that long of a holding period. Because I can very vividly remember, especially growing up in Texas, you know, you'd have all these farmers and they talk about, yeah, I bought that land 30 years ago and I sold it for twice what I paid for it, you know, and you're like, okay, not such a great investment, you know, if you had to hold on to it for 30 years and you only got double what you paid for it, you know, let's just see what that would be. So 30 years, 2.34%.
That's terrible.
You'd probably be better off just sticking the money in a savings account.
Unless you're selling your cattle for $1,000 a head.
Are there any other things?
Okay, the farmer has other income.
Okay, but you get the idea. The point that I'm trying to stress is holding period matters. Okay? Now, it also works in reverse. Because you can obviously hold something for less than a year, yes? And that's where it really gets fun. Because think of it like this. Okay? So to put in, let's say, half a year, what you can do is just put in 0.5, which would be half a year, in, or shift in, either way. $300% rate of return. Okay? And the closer you get, basically down to almost like an overnight sort of, situation of where you bought it today and then you flipped it literally like almost the next day, your rate of return is outrageous. And see, this is where you have to kind of begin to sort of say, okay, rate of return is one thing, but you also need to focus on not just the rate of return, but also the amount of the return, okay? Because the amount of the return, is significant. You went from putting out $100,000 and getting back $200,000, so you're getting $100,000 of extra income, but my point was, it does matter what the length of that holding period was as to what your real rate of return is. And here's another thing, a little short of just a mind teaser a little bit. So let's just say that and I actually had a student that did this many years ago. He had a business where he bought cars, used cars, and sold them. And did it just on his own. It was all cash money, okay? And so what he would do, to kind of prime the pump a little bit at the very beginning, he would go with cash advances off of credit cards. Off of almost like payday loan kind of things, and get 15, 20 grand, whatever he needed, to buy the car. And the interest rates on those things were outrageous. Let's just keep it simple and say the interest rate was 25% per year. Okay? Well, think about this in some very simple terms. If he bought the car at the beginning of the year for $10,000, in order to break even, if he sold it at the end of the year with a 25% interest rate, he would sell it for $12,500. Does that make sense?
What about the compounding?
No, but that would just be, once again, just a simple interest of 25% from beginning of the year to end of the year. He would have to sell it for $12,500. Now, and so you'd think, okay, well, he's got to sell it for something, north of that in order to make money. But no, see, your mind is already going to the 25%. When it should be going to holding period. He's buying this car and he's flipping it within a week.
What is the cost of that over how long?
Yeah, so that's the point. What matters is, what is his holding cost or his borrowing cost for a week or 2 weeks or a month? And obviously the longer that he has to hold that car in inventory, the higher, dollar amount that he has to get for it, under those sort of circumstances. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, now the reason I tell you that is not for you to go and try to do that, is for you to think about things, in terms of, what is my cost of borrowing and what is my holding period, because that really truly matters. Okay, this is why you get really upset really quick as a developer whenever you're sitting and waiting for a local government to make a decision about your zoning change or about your building permit or about some other sort of an entitlement process that you've got to go through. Does that make sense? Okay? All right, moving forward. Any questions? Okay. All right, let's just do another sort of future value-ishy kind of problem. All right, so what do we want to, we obviously want to solve for future value, but what kind of problem do we want to set up? Give me an example. Anything?
Let's do an investment.
Okay, do an investment of some sort, okay? So what is the investment we're going to do? First of all, we're going to do this monthly or annual? Okay, monthly, so 12 payments per year. Okay? All right, so we're gonna change things up a little bit. Since you said it was gonna be an investment, we're gonna make this a little savings account for ourselves or a retirement account for ourselves. So we're gonna set aside a certain dollar amount each month that we're gonna deposit into, and it can also be real estate, it doesn't have to be a savings account, it's all just the numbers. So how much can we set aside each month as a savings amount? What? $1,000. Okay, so we're gonna put $1,000, and that's going to be a payment that we're going to deposit each month into an account. We're not borrowing any money here, we're putting money into an account and effectively seeing how much we can achieve over a certain period of time. Okay, so how long are we gonna keep it in there? How many years?
10.
Okay, 10 years. What I'm trying to show you with this somewhat interactive nature of these problems is the numbers don't really matter. Okay, what ultimately matters is, well, once again, you know, putting them in and ultimately solving for what we're asking for. Okay, all right. So let's say, what interest rate do we have on this account? How much?
2%.
2%. Okay, so in this case, we're going to solve for future value. All right, now just for fun, if we were to sort of just kind of mechanically work our way through this, $1,000 a month times 12 months in a year is $12,000, yes?
Mm-hmm.
And we're putting that in there for 10 years. So at a minimum, we should have $120,000, yes?
Yes.
Okay, does everybody follow me on that? So that's just the simple math, not taking into account the interest, just simply looking at dollars in and how much we put in. So let me just see. Okay. 1,000, 10 years, 2%, future value. $132,719.66. So basically, we got about $12,000, $12,719.66 of interest. Does everybody follow me on that? Okay. Does that make sense? Yes, no, possibly could be. Okay. All right. So let's flip this around another way. Okay. Let's solve for the interest rate or rate of return on something. All right? So let's say we're going to have something that's going to be on an annual basis, so 1 payment per year. Okay? Let's do this. We kind of already did this with the future value thing, but let's do it this way.
Solving for the rate of return?
We're solving for the rate of return. Okay, so we're going to go back to this sort of 100,000, 200,000, okay, as our future value. But I want to actually do it this way.
Thank you.
I want to show you something here real quick. Okay. I meant to show you a while ago, but I didn't. All right, and we're going to put in, let's say, 5 years. Okay, now, like the previous problem that we did, it was something sort of like this. We've got $100,000 investment, $200,000 sale, 5-year term. Now, if you try to solve for this, I'm trying to teach you a lesson with this on purpose. You try to solve for this, what you're going to get is no solution. Okay? And the reason you're going to get no solution is because both of those have been put in as positive numbers. Okay? So from the calculator's perspective, the calculator is saying, woohoo, I'm getting $100,000 and I'm getting another $200,000, and you're asking me to calculate a rate of return on that. Well, it's not possible because there was no investment. It's just money falling from the sky. Okay? So there has to be an investment in order to calculate a rate of return. All right? So that's where I should have mentioned it, that's why I'm mentioning it now, is that you need to put one of these in as a negative to show that it was an initial investment. It was a cash out of pocket that ultimately will generate a rate of return. Does that make sense? Okay? Let me just real quickly to see what it is. You end up with 14.86 or 87% rate of return. Okay? Angelo.
Scroll up for just a moment.
Yeah, 14.7.
So you did 100,000 payment. That's your present balance.
Now make sure you got it set for one payment per year though. See? Saying. That's why you got it. And I'm purposely, there's a method of my madness on this. That's why I purposely vacillate between problems that are 12 payments per year, and those are one payment per
Right,
year.
because this is just, we're paying the 100 and then we're just getting it back. We're getting it on a consecutive basis. Okay.
Okay? Now, here's another interesting point. Let's tweak this problem a little bit. Okay, so this problem, very straightforward. We bought a property for $100,000, we're selling it 5 years later for $200,000, we're getting our 14% rate of return. Everybody cool with that? Yes or no? Now, what if we were to introduce a payment into this? Now, the payment could be a negative payment, could be a positive payment, depending on what we're trying to sort of achieve. So if we're looking at this, we're the investor. We initially wrote a check for 200 grand, I'm sorry, we initially wrote a check for 100 grand, we're getting back 200, but yet over this 5-year holding period, each year, we can have a negative payment or we can have a positive payment. If it was a negative payment, that might be an example of what? Property taxes, insurance, other stuff, just holding costs that we might have incurred over that 5-year holding period each year. Does that make sense?
Like a service.
Yeah, like a service fee. But we also could flip it around and say, well, it could have also been rental income that we received off of the property each year from a tenant. You follow? So that's where people always ask, well, does it matter whether you make it a negative or you make it a positive? Yeah, it matters depending on the perspective. So what perspective do we want? Let's just do both, okay? Just kind of illustrate the point. So let's say that each year, in order to make it kind of a significant thing, we're going to make it a $10,000 a year payment, okay? All right, so that really means, let's just put it in perspective. $10,000 a year times 5 years would mean literally an extra $50,000 of income off of this investment, yes? If we're doing it as a positive. Okay? So if we do that, and we just simply resolve for the rate of return, that's all you have to do. Oops, put it in. Should get 22.74%. Does everybody see that? Okay, so now, just to make sure, This is what you need to be interpreting. So if I gave you a written problem, it would be something like, okay, you purchased a property for $100,000, you sold it 5 years later for $200,000, and then each year you were able to generate $10,000 of additional income on the property. Give me the rate of return on this property. Then the answer would be the 22.74. Okay, now if I change the wording on that problem, and I were to say, instead of a $10,000 positive payment, I make it a $10,000 negative payment. And all you gotta do is just simply change that one variable, and let's see what happens. So 10,000 plus or minus payment. Now solve for the interest rate. So that dragged us down to where we only got a 7.29% rate of return, because we're in essence, we're losing $50,000 of the amount that we're actually generating on the property. Does that make sense? Okay? So that's definitely where the whole plus or minus thing makes a huge difference in terms of being able to say whether the property is generating revenue or whether it's basically costing you revenue. Yep.
Could you just go along there and then at the, where we are there, when we do with the 10,000, and is that, could you there add and subtract every little thing that's added?
Yeah, here's the way to think about this in terms of the way the calculator looks at this. You're putting in this as a variable. You're putting this in as a variable. You're putting this in as a variable. You're solving for this. Okay. Once you have solved, then the calculator says, okay, if you're going to put this in, we're adding that as a new variable. So whenever you solve for this, it takes into account that. Then, if you want to change that variable or any variable, you can. We could have changed this, we could have changed that, we could have changed that. But we just chose to change just the payment amount and make it a outflow or negative, and then resolve. So all it's doing is just, think of it as like this one big equation, and you're just substituting the numbers within that equation. That's really what it is. It's just an equation.
What I was trying to ask is that, say, you receive $50,000 in rent for those 5 years.
Yep.
And then within that rent, you have maintenance costs. Can you?
Okay, then you would have a net number.
Yeah, okay. So you want
So, like for example, if you're generating $50,000 of new income, and your expenses were maybe, $2,500 a year, that means you would be only netting $7,500 each year for 5 years.
So that's what I'm going to put there and not try to do that calculation there.
Right.
I want to come with that.
Rex.
Is there ever a moment where the future value of $200,000 isn't in direct correlation to the rate of return and the payments coming in? You know what I'm saying? Like if you had future value $200,000, and I'm looking at, hey, well, if we've got 22.74%, well then our future value should have been higher. That's what I'm looking at. And so, is there any moment where, do you follow me?
That's exactly what goes into that number.
Yeah, I mean that's these are simply the input variables, and then these are just simply the solution for those input variables. But so it is always going to matter. I guess is my point. That because all you're really doing is you're calculating, well, what is?
I guess I'm looking at the other way.
Okay, explain how you're looking at it. Just.
Well, I mean, thinking about, like, if I'm trying to value a property as someone who's trying to figure out, hey, what should I price this property at? Well, hey, look, if they're bringing in this much money, all right, say it's bringing in $10,000 a year, 5 years, that's $50,000. What do we think a good cap rate is right now? Okay, it's great, it's 10%. What does that need to be at? Future value, you know what I mean?
That is then going to be a present value problem. So we're going to do that. Well, let's just do that right now.
I have a question.
Yep.
So if I wanted to change the 5 to a 3 within that equation, we can go in there?
It'll automatically adjust it.
So it would just be 3 shift in?
Yep, so like for example, you just sort of pick up where you left off.
Okay.
So as an example, right here, you're saying, okay, so instead of 5 years, you want to go to 3 years.
Right.
Okay, so if you do 3, shift in, and then now solve for the rate of return.
Thank you.
So in this case,
17.9.
yeah, 17.9. So once again, illustrating my point, holding period matters.
Yes.
Okay? Because you've got, not only you have 2 less years of outflows, but you're getting your money quicker from the sale. Okay? All right, other questions before we move on? Yep.
Just really, my calculator won't let me do the once per year or something, or I'm completely doing something wrong. I know it's like the very elementary.
So what are you going to do? 1 shift and pay per year. Okay. All right. So let's do sort of a present value sort of thing. We'll take kind of, if I'm understanding Max's question correctly. All right. So we want to do this on monthly or annual?
Monthly will be good.
Okay. So we're going to do 12 payments per year. Okay, so your question is, okay, you've got a property that you're potentially trying to value, and you're saying, okay, it generates how much per year, or sorry, per month of net operating income? Give me a number each month.
$1,500.
$1,500 a month is income that it is generating. So that is going to be a payment that you're going to be receiving as the owner of this property. Okay? How long do we anticipate holding this property?
5 years.
Okay, 5 years. So 5-year holding period, which is going to be, or 60 months. Okay, 5 times 12, 60 months. Okay? And now we can approach this a couple different ways. One is you want to set a predetermined future value on this. Do you want to set a specific rate of return that you want to achieve? What direction do you want to come at it from?
Future value.
Okay, so we've got, how much do you think it's going to be worth at 5 years into the future?
225.
Okay, that's also going to be a positive number because that's going to be your reversion value coming back to you. Okay, now, do we want to set some sort of a hurdle rate or some sort of a required rate of return for the investor?
8%.
Okay, 8%. All right, so now, based on all that, we're going to basically tell us how much should that investor pay for this property? Okay, in today's dollars. Let's just see. In this case, it equals precisely $225,000 because that is an 8% rate of return is $1,500 a year. Just mathematically, this isn't how it work out.
You should get a lot of.
If you think of it, $1,500 a year times 12 is basically $18,000 a year. Okay, does that answer your question though? Mm-hmm. Okay, so now what we could do is to say, well, what if instead of demanding an 8% rate of return, they would settle for a 5% rate of return? What's that going to do? Okay, so let's just see. Okay. $254,807.27. So in this case, with a lower required rate of return or a lower hurdle rate, then they would be willing to pay that much more for the property. Does that make sense? Okay. Now this also kind of gets into another discussion that we're going to have a little bit later as well. I use this term hurdle rate. hurdle rate, okay? Any of you that ever ran track, what's a hurdle? Something you jump over, yes? Okay? All right, so same concept, but in real estate and in finance, a hurdle rate is basically that minimum rate of return that you have to achieve internally to satisfy everybody, okay? Now, that hurdle rate is different for different investors because Max here, you know, he may be able to get super duper cheap money from some sort of source that they're only willing, or they're willing to invest with him as long as he can get them greater than a 5% rate of return. They're thrilled to death. So the hurdle rate for them is only a 5% hurdle rate. But yet, you know, Angelo over here is dealing with some folks and they're saying their hurdle rate, the minimum rate of return that they will invest in, they've got to get 15%. Okay? Those are two different players. You know, so at 15%, the kind of deals they're going to work for you aren't necessarily, you know, going to work for you for different reasons. That chances are, in order to get 15% rate of return, you're probably going to have to undertake a lot of risk that your guys might not be willing to undertake. Okay? So, you know, that's what I'm saying. You know, every sort of investor is going to be a little bit different as to what it is they're trying to achieve. Okay? And what sort of a minimum rate of return or hurdle rate that they need to have. And part of that's going to be dictated by where they're getting their money. If their money is just literally coming out of their back pocket and, you know, they've, you know, wealthy family and just tons of money and you know, they're not really borrowing any of the money, it's just money that they have literally laying around, then their rate of return and their hurdle rate's usually going to be, in a lot of cases, pretty low. But if it's, you know, somebody that's going to be borrowing a lot of money and they're potentially looking for, you know, a high risk, you know, high return sort of investment, totally different sort of player. Okay? All right, moving forward. All right. So is all this making sense for the most part? Okay, good. All right. So we've done, obviously, number one. We've done number two. Number three, we've done basically present value of an annuity, which is what we just did, literally. Oh, perpetuities. Let's talk about those for a second. Okay, perpetuities. Anybody have any idea what a perpetuity is? Forever. Okay? So the idea behind a perpetuity is that you are either going to be making or receiving, or making payments or receiving payments forever. Okay? You're saying, does that ever happen? Yeah, it happens in the most common ways that it happens. Like if you endow a scholarship account with a university, like we were just given, you know, $2 million for the Terry Stiles School of Real Estate. Okay, so what happens is we have donors that gave us $2 million for the Terry Stiles School of Real Estate, and then each year the university invests that money into an interest-bearing account, and that interest-bearing account, let's say, throws off 5% a year. So what does that mean? You've got $2 million. This is basically an ERV problem. You've got a value of $2 million, and you have a rate of return of, let's say, 5%. So $2 million times 5% means an annual income that would throw off of $100,000 a year forever without ever touching the original $2 million. Does that make sense? Okay? Because all you're doing is you're just taking the interest that you're earning on that $2 million and paying that out in scholarships or, you know, whatever it might be. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay? Now, if the university is able to get more than a 5% rate of return on that money, that means that in essence they can pay out more, in scholarships. So, for example, if instead of 5%, they can get 7%. So 2 million times 7%. So instead of only being able to give out $100,000 a year, they'd be able to give out $140,000 a year. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, obviously, the reverse is true. If interest rates go down to, let's say, 3%, so 2 million times 3%, we're going to be able to give out 60,000. Okay? So a perpetuity, and we'll get to your question just in a second. A perpetuity is just simply a fixed dollar amount that earns interest, and then you use that interest for something. Typically, the most common is an endowment fund for like a scholarship, or it could be for like a building fund for a church, could be for cemeteries. Just think about like cemeteries. Cemeteries are fascinating real estate. Whenever you buy a cemetery plot, one of the costs that is embedded within that price that you pay for that burial plot is what is called a perpetual care fund fee. And that perpetual care fund fee does exactly this. That dollar amount goes into, in essence, a savings account. You say, well, why would you need a perpetual care fund fee? Well, you gotta have somebody to mow the grass. You gotta have somebody to maintain, the grounds into perpetuity. And so that perpetual care fund fee is set aside in that savings account, and then you use the revenue to take care of that routine maintenance that takes place over however many years. Well, basically forever, okay? Now the hope is that you put in enough money up front in that perpetual care fund fee to be able to make sure that that money is going to be there, in perpetuity. Otherwise, somebody's gonna have to step in and, take over the maintenance, okay? Question?
Is it possible that, say I was bringing $2 million to a bank and, they only wanted to offer me 5%, is it possible that I could negotiate with them to get 7% if I guaranteed that it was going to stay in the bank a certain amount of time?
Yeah, I mean, in essence, you sort of do that with, things like certificates of deposit and whatnot, that you will, the longer that you're willing to commit to it staying in there, then typically it's usually not going to be that much of a difference, but it'll be a little bit of a difference in terms of the rate that they will potentially give you.
Give and take.
Right. But, for the most part, the whole idea behind perpetuities is just simply, it's money that supposedly you're going to get forever and ever based upon the amount that has been originally endowed or invested.
Are the interest-only loans?
Yep.
Same thing? You never paid the principal?
Yeah, but we're going to get into that. Interest-only loans, you never ever pay down the principal of the loan, so the value of the property stays the same, and it's still costing you that same amount of interest each year. But it's not quite the same, because this is really talking about it more from an investment point of view. That is more of a costing. I don't want to muddy it up. Okay, we'll deal with that later. Trust me. Okay. Other questions on the whole idea of perpetuity? Okay. Alrighty, Drew. Boom, boom, boom. Ooh, internal rate of return. See that? Okay, new page. IRR, internal rate of return. Okay. Up to this point, the only kind of interest rate calculation that we've done has been, simply using the interest rate feature on the calculator for either a set present value amount or future value amount or whatever. But sometimes, actually not just sometimes, but most of the time in reality, we have investments that don't generate the same amount of income each year or each period. In other words, if you buy an investment property, an apartment complex or office building, whatever, from one year to the next, your income may do this. It may go up from one year, may go down the next year, may go up again, may go up, may go down, down. And so we need a way to be able to deal with that sort of varying cash flow. Okay, does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, and so the way to do that is we access a new function on the calculator. We access the cash flow function, and specifically we also access the internal rate of return function and the net present value function. So let's give some examples. All right, so let's assume that we have a property and it is generating income of 1 payment per year. Okay, keep things simple. Clear everything out. All right. Now, for this particular property, tell me, how much did we spend on this property up front when we bought it? $200,000. So we're going to put in $200,000, and we're going to put it in as a negative. So we're going to change the sign. But what we're going to put it in as, not as present value, we're going to put it in as a cash flow. Okay, I'm going to show you how to do that here in just a second and explain it. All right, pull up the calculator here for a second. All right. On the calculator, under, if you hit the actually, you don't need to hit the shift key. Third row, third column, CF sub J is the cash flow key. Now what the cash flow key is, just what it sort of sounds like. It's like you have a property, it's generating cash flow, and you're simply putting in positive cash flows and negative cash flows in order to generate a rate of return. The only reason you really are using this function is because you have an income stream that is non-constant. In other words, with the examples that we have worked up to this point, you've had the same dollar amount you've been charging for rent, or the same dollar amount for expenses, or whatever from 1 year to the next, or 1 month to the next. Here, we're going to make the assumption that every year, or every month, or whatever, is going to be different. Whether it's going up, whether it's going down, whether it's going up and down, doesn't really matter. We're having to put them in individually, okay? So in this case, we put in the 200,000, and this is basically, kind of put things in perspective here. If you look at it from a time perspective, time period 0 is this negative 200,000. Now you're going to hear it sort of referred to as time period 0 because time period 0 means right now, okay? Right this minute, we're making that investment, okay? And then subsequent to that will be either month 1 or year 1. In this case, since we've set it up on 1 payment per year, that means annually. We're going to be either getting or making payments. Okay, so in this case, at the end of the first year, after we have paid all of our bills, what's going to be our net operating income? You give me a number. It's obviously being something less than 200,000.
50,000.
50,000 is a lot, but okay. 50,000, okay, for that first year. So we've got a property that's definitely generating some income, all right? So $50,000, and that's just simply going to be a cash flow, but it's going to be a positive cash flow. Now, whenever you put this into the calculator, what you're going to note, okay, if we put these in, we put in 200,000, and you put in the cash flow, and then it's going to show up in your display real briefly. It's going to say CF 0, meaning cash flow for period 1. Right? See that? Okay. Then when you put in the 50,000, oops, and you hit cash flow, it's going to now say CF 1, meaning cash flow for period 1 or year 1 in this case. Everybody with me? Yeah. Okay. All right. So what are we going to? How much money are we going to generate the second year?
40,000.
Okay, half that is 25,000, and then I heard somebody say, so the next year we're going to do 40,000, and then give me another year or two.
38 and 22.
22. All right, so just for fun, before we went and input those, I'm going to do something. I just want to add all these up. Okay? So 50,000 plus 25 plus 40 plus 38 plus 22 gives me 175,000 of total income. Okay? Now, what happens here at the end of year 5? Sell it. We're going to probably sell the property. Okay? Which means we get what? What is called a reversion value. Reversion simply means reverting back to the owner of the property, okay, in terms of revenue, okay? So how much are we going to sell it for? Now, this is where it begins to get interesting. I mean, we're going to sell it for what we paid for it, sell it for less than we paid for it, sell it for more than we paid for it.
Depends on the market.
Depends on the market, depends on the cap rate, but if we're really, you know, to kind of use the, so what do we maybe see happening here, roughly? I mean, this is not a perfect case of it, but what do we kind of see roughly with the performance of this property?
Almost double, close to double in his,
I'm sorry?
close to double in his value.
I wouldn't say that.
I would say it's having some volatile.
Okay, so they did really well the first year, okay? Second year, somebody screwed up and did something, okay? Maybe the occupancy maybe went way down, or they spent way too much on expenses or something. They kind of did okay in that third year, but then it went down a little bit in that fourth year, and then we're back down to somebody did something screwy in the fifth year. So now, here's the thing. We're trying to value this thing, and we're an investor, and we look at that kind of cash flow, that sort of variance, we're going to say something's not quite right, you know, because you shouldn't have that kind of variance. Now, if each year you can explain it, okay, we did some major capital improvements here to the property, okay, to make it that much better. But yet, you know, but then again, it really didn't, you know, sustain it. You know, what happened here? Well, maybe, you know, once again, we lost all of our tenants because somebody new built a project across the street with better rents, you know. So, you know, there's always a story, is my point, with each of these numbers that you have to sort of dive into to be able to try to understand. Now, the part that begins to be more interesting is, okay, based on all of this, what do we think the property should be worth to sell it at the end of that year 6 or end of year 5?
150.
Because you could say, well, I mean, you're going to apply the cap rate, but do you apply the cap rate to that 5th year? Well, technically, yeah, because you're saying, well, that's that's what it is, you know. But, you know, unless there's a good explanation, you know, that it's going to rebound from that real quickly. So, you know, we may say that we might apply a 10% cap rate. Well, a 10% cap rate there would mean $220,000 sale value. I'm just making that up just to keep things simple, okay? So what that means is that in this final year, and this is a key thing, key. I say that a lot, but when I say it, I really, because this is, the reason I say that is because I know where you're going to make mistakes before you make them, because I've seen this. And that's when I say that, I'm trying to help you from making the mistake. All right. In that 5th year, your total income off of that 5th year is going to be what? Those two added together. In other words, it's going to be $22,000 plus the $220,000, which is going to be $242,000 for that final year. Does that make sense to everybody? Because you're adding together the income the property is generating in terms of operating income with the resale value. Does that make sense? Yes or no? Because, okay, that's the reason I stopped with putting the income in. So to finish out how to do it with the calculator, you're simply going to keep going, putting these numbers in. But then for that final year, that's where this matters. You're going to put in the $242,000 as that final cash flow. Now, the question that, or the problem that, or what usually happens, the mistake that usually happens is people say, okay, well, I'm going to put $22,000 in for year 5, and then right after that, we're going to sell it for $220,000, and then they put that in as year 6. That's not the same. That's, in essence, that would be deferring that 220,000 for an entire year before you actually receive it. Does that make sense? And that would influence your rate of return. Yep.
Is there a way to go in and change one of the years?
What do you mean?
So, say you entered 22,000 there, pressed your CFJ, is there a way to go and change a specific CFJ and income
No.
for a certain year?
Yeah. Start over. Okay. And this also gets back to one of my other little points about this. Always write down your setup for yourself, you know, so that you've got it written down, so that you know how to, or what to be inputting into the calculator, so that hopefully you don't screw up and have to do everything all over again. All right. Now, once we've got all of this put in as our series of cash flows, then all we have to do is hit the shift and then the internal rate of return for the year key. Okay, so it's another new key on the calculator. Okay? So you're going to hit shift, and then right underneath this CST, the cost button, is IRR/year. Okay, so that's what you're going to be accessing here to get the rate of return for that 5-year holding period. So let's do that real quick.
Yes. $19.62? Okay, so that is simply telling us that over that 5-year holding period, that our average rate of return was 19.62. Okay, for any given year, it may have been more than that, it may have been less than that, but in essence, the weighted average of those income streams made the overall 5-year holding period of a 19.62. Does that make sense? Yes or no? Okay. So, I'm just trying to test your recall. So, if this was Angelo's set of investors that were demanding a 15% rate of return as their hurdle rate, would they do this investment? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, simple as that. Because the rate of return is obviously 19.62, which is above 15%. But let's say that we've got another, that Woody has some investors that are even greedier, and Woody's investors want a 25% rate of return. Would they do this investment?
No.
No, because we haven't met their hurdle rate. Okay? So just because the property is earning money, and actually earning a nice rate of return, it may not be nice enough for whatever investors are out there in the market looking for deals. Because they all have their own perspective as to how much they want to get based on what risk that they're willing to undertake. Okay? We good? Now, let's kind of take this a step further. All right. So let's go back to Angelo's investors here for a second. All right, we said they wanted a 15% rate of return. All right, so let's put in 15% as our interest rate. Just right after that. And then let's solve for something new, another new button, net present value, NPV. Okay, let's look over here at the calculator. Let's find where net present value is. Okay, so shift, and then NPV is right here underneath this PRC button. So net present value. Let's see what we get, and then we're going to explain this. You should get 30,725, 89.90 roughly rounded. Okay? All right. So just put the undergraduate finance majors for the moment on the spot. Okay, so those of you undergraduate finance majors, raise your hand real quick. You know you're going to be called in eventually. All right, so there's at least 3 of you. All right? Now, what does that net present value number represent?
What makes the equal to 0? What makes the
I know where you're going with
present
it.
value
You're almost there.
It's the amount over the 15%.
Yes. Okay. So here's a way to look at this. The project, everyone agrees, the project is yielding a 19.6% rate of return. Everybody's in agreement with that, yes?
Right.
Okay.
That's your promotional balance.
Yeah, that's no way to look. Okay. So this 15% required rate of return is what your investors, what Angelo's investors are requiring at a minimum for them to do the deal. Yes? Everybody with me on that? So what we're saying this number represents is the amount of cash or the dollar value that this project is generating above the 15%. Okay? Is a way to look at that. All right?
On that.
On the front end. That in essence what you're saying is they're going to get their 15% rate of return on this investment, but they could also get, depending on the structuring of the deal, they could also get an additional $30,000 above and beyond that, okay, in cash. Okay, is another way to look at it. But it also could be, once again, this is where the investment class, we start getting into all the cool deal structure stuff, is that you could say, Angelo's investors are happy with their 15%. That's all they want, is their 15%. Give me my 15%, they'll leave you alone. And then you, as the person putting the deal together and getting everything up and running and whatever, that everything you can earn above and beyond that is yours to keep. Does that make sense?
So that's what we want when we're in the field.
To a certain extent, yes. Okay, so what's wrong with that?
Just to kind of sum it up, so NPV 0 would mean you exactly matched your hurdle rate. Just to kind of,
Okay,
finance.
so here's the way, what both of these guys are talking about, they're talking about this whole matching up to 0. Here's what they're talking about. If we were to put in 19.62 as our interest rate, we should get pretty darn close to the net present value being 0. It's going to be off a little bit only because of rounding, but it should be pretty close to 0. So let's put in 19.62 interest rate, solve for net present value, and it ends up being $8.64, but that's only because of rounding. If we had actually carried out the decimals for several places, it would be 0. Okay? So the point there is that if we achieve our 19.62% rate of return, then you're not really making anything, significant above or below what your required rate of return is. Yep.
I have a question. So I've had a lot of investors that typically focus on the cap rate only.
Yep.
But then when you're looking at this, there's 2 major components that in essence are being looked at when you're evaluating an investment on where your investor is going to go, isn't it?
Okay, in what way?
So if we were to just focus on a cap rate,
Yep.
you bought this at a 10%
Yep,
cap
yep,
rate.
yep, yep.
But you really need to be looking at the overall cash flow to see what
Yes.
you're, so you really need to be looking at
Yes,
both numbers.
absolutely, 100%,
When you're
yes.
giving, okay. So then why is it that so many times it's when they're presented on the market, it's focused so much on the cap rate?
It's a simple calculation.
Like a sales price.
Just because of that?
It's a simple, easy calculation, whereas this requires a bit more effort.
Gotcha.
And it's a sophistication thing, you know, I mean, really, because cap rate you can do on the back of an
Right.
envelope napkin.
Right.
This requires a financial calculator. Okay, or a spreadsheet.
Right, but essentially, if you're looking at the cap rate, you're like, oh, I'm at 10%, but
Right.
really your investment is worth that 19.6%.
Right. Right.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, all right, other questions on this? Does it make sense? Nice warm fuzzy feelings inside? Okay, good. All right. Moving forward.
20%, yeah. It's pretty warm.
Okay, let's see, what other damage can I do?
Oh yeah, house perpetuity. Pretty
Let's
easy.
see.
Just under over the rate.
Okay, well, number 10 is super easy. Okay, number 10 is just all about just a normal mortgage. All right, let's just see if you can do it. All right, number 10, you do it. Number 10, you got the solution, but don't use the solution. See if you can do it on your own. Number 10, the normal mortgage. At some point, the rubber has to hit the road and you have to do this stuff.
I have a quick question.
Yep.
About the one from before, the 864.
Yep. What about it?
So we changed our investor required rate to 19.6.
Well, actually, what the project generates, and so the whole point is that when you do that, then the net present value should be pretty darn close to zero. It should be zero, the only reason it's not is okay, so,
Sure, if you did it wrong.
number 10, 12 payments per year, $6 million loan or present value, 7.5% interest rate, 30 years or 360 months, and then solve for your monthly payment, you should get to $41,952.87. Now, just to sort of show you, just in case you haven't figured it out, that I obviously gave you the answers for all of those, so you can look at, in this case, number 10, and see the exact same thing, okay? That it hasn't worked out for you. Now, here, let me give you some pointers on this. When trying to study and when trying to do this, let me tell you what to do and what not to do. Again, 30 years of doing this, I'm telling you what works and what doesn't, okay? What you should do for every single one of those problems, not just those, but others that you're kind of working through, you know, that I've worked and reworking, you should, number one, take each problem on its own, work through it, just like you would on a test or on an exam or whatever. Don't peek at the answers while you're doing it. Do it, get it done, do the next one, do it, get it done. Whenever you've done all of them that you can do, then look at the answers and peek at the answers and see what you did wrong. Because if you try to peek at it while you're doing it, even though you think that will help you, it will only hurt you. Trust me on this, okay? Because what you need to be able to do is you need to be able to see, you need to be able to struggle on your own and then try to figure it out on your own. And then, after you have completely given up and you have no hope, then at some point you've got to look at the answer and see how it was done. But if you just try to do that and like constantly peeking at the answer, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, I know what I'm doing now. You don't know what you're doing. Trust me, okay? You don't know what you're doing. You're basically getting hints from the answers, okay? That is not learning it, trust me. All right? You're cheating yourself when you do that. All right, moving forward. All right. Let's go with other kinds of problems. I'm not gonna, there's no need for me to work any of these because you've obviously got the solutions for all of these. I'm not gonna give you other examples here. Well, somebody asked about an interest-only loan, so let's talk about interest-only loans. It's a variation. Okay. This is a good sort of point to talk a little bit about history. Okay? You know, I spend a lot of time talking about problems, but let's talk a little bit about history here for a second because I think it gives perspective. Have we always had the kind of loans we have today? No. There is a reason why we have the kind of loans we have today and why certain kinds of loans we used to have, we no longer have or don't use in the same way. So, the first types of loans that kind of, you know, sort of came into being, at least in the modern world, especially, and if you think, when I say the modern world, I'm talking about the 1800s, 1700s, 1800s kind of time frame. And you have these loans for a family farm or a family ranch or, you know, something of that, you know, vernacular. And most all of these loans were interest-only loans, okay? And the reason why interest-only loans were used, it was simple math. They didn't have the technology that we have today to do relatively sophisticated calculations using a calculator or a spreadsheet. So everything was done by hand, okay? So you put things in the context of the time period that we're in. So what would happen is you would have the local farmer go into town to the lender and say, okay, I need to borrow, you know, $100,000. And the local lender said, fine, we're going to make you a 5-year loan, and we're going to charge you a flat 10% interest rate. Now, what that meant was, in terms of a cash flow stream, if you want to sort of think of it from the borrower or the lender's perspective, we can work it either way, but let's just say we look at it from the lender's perspective. At time period 0, the lender is giving away $100,000 to the farmer, yes? And then at the end of year 1, they're going to come in with this big payment of $10,000. What I'm basing that on is $100,000 times 10% of interest each year would be $10,000 of interest. Okay, so they're going to make a $10,000 interest payment there, $10,000 payment there, $10,000 payment there, $10,000 payment there, and $10,000 payment here. But what would happen at the end of that 5 years, the loan became due. Okay? And so the farmer had to come up with the original $100,000 that they were loaned. Now, without me being overly dramatic in this, where's the farmer supposed to get the $100,000 from?
Selling the house.
Okay, maybe a refi, but what if the lender's unwilling to do a refi? Sell. Okay? What if there's not a strong market for the property to be sold?
Then you're buying default.
Potentially loses it and defaults. But here's the interesting thing. Now, assuming that this was pretty much raw land whenever the farmer bought it, what has probably happened over that 5 years? They've improved it. They maybe built a house, put up a fence, maybe a barn, got some livestock out there running around, maybe planted some crops, whatever. So the property is probably worth more than what originally it was worth. Yes? Okay. I'm setting all of this up because, whenever I was a kid, you always watched these westerns that would come on TV on Saturdays, and I'm sure Woody and I are roughly the same age. And these westerns that would come on, it was the constant theme of the farmer would go get the loan, would go basically build their farm, and then a few years later, then the bad evil lender would come in to foreclose on the family farm, and all these horrible things would take place. And part of the reason for that was because the farmer couldn't come up with that $100,000. So the only way the farmer would have come up with that $100,000, for the most part, in a legitimate way, they would have had to, stuff $20,000 a year in the mattress, so to speak, to basically come up with $100,000 at the end of the 5 years. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay? But chances are, they're living from, literally crop to crop and sale of livestock and whatever else, and they're probably not generating that much additional revenue. My point with this is among many examples of basically unscrupulous lenders taking advantage of people. Okay? But at the same time, it also sort of illustrates, a loan structure that doesn't always make sense, because the first answer that I heard whenever, well, what do you do at the end of the 5 years, was refinance. Well, okay, if that lender was willing to, okay, we're going to, allow you to continue making these payments to us, indefinitely, but even doing so, with an interest-only loan, you never, ever, 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 ever own the property, because you're just making interest payments. You're not paying down any of the balance of the loan. Now, it's interesting to note, one of the biggest indicators of, within recent history, whenever we had the 2006, 2007, collapse of everything, what was one of the types of loans that were being made at a rapid pace? Interest-only loans with extended terms and low documentation and whatever.
Reserves.
With very little, put on, in terms of protections. Well, strangely enough, I read an article just this past week that said, what is up? Interest-only loans, low doc loans, all that stuff is all up again, okay? And, so you're like, it doesn't take, once again, a rocket scientist to kind of begin to look at that and say, we're probably going to be heading for some rough water within relatively, short-term horizon. But in any event, getting back to this, so that loan structure, that was pretty much in use for many, many, many years until pretty much around the 1920s, 1930s, at least here in the U.S., whenever we started to use what we kind of use now, at least as the base sort of traditional constant payment mortgage. But intervening within that, we also had something I'm going to show you, a constant amortization mortgage that was a little bit simpler from a calculation perspective. Yep.
So what about loans? So say you got a 30-year loan, but the first 5 years is interest only. How would you calculate that?
You would set it up pretty much the same way, and then from that point forward, from year 6, then you would add in what are the principal payments that would then begin to reduce the balance at the end of that 5 years. So probably for that first 5 years, we would actually have something that we're going to be dealing with, which is negative amortization, which is a nasty thing, because it's pretty much the whole idea that you owe more than you originally borrowed, okay? Well, it's kind of like, I mean, the easy vernacular for those of you that have had car loans, it's being upside down on a car loan kind of thing. That, you know, you bought the car for, you know, whatever, $20,000, and, you know, you got a loan maybe for $20,000, but yet you try to go trade the car in, and you still maybe owe $15,000, and all they're willing to give you for the car is maybe $13,000. So you're upside down by a couple of grand, okay? Well, same sort of thing happens in real estate, where that, once again, especially with that sort of a situation where you would not be making principal payments for maybe a number of years, and then all of a sudden you start making principal payments, you may end up, as I said, you're going to end up owing more than you would have. Okay, we're going to show some examples of that. Okay, are we comfortable with this? Yep, question.
One question is, where is a good place that you can monitor how much mortgage, what type of mortgage activity is going on in the United States? Is there anything Fannie and Freddie Mac?
There's literally a gazillion sources. I mean, it would honestly be the sort of thing, I don't have one particular source I automatically go to. I, just like anyone else, will Google it. You know, and just simply say, okay, what are the prevailing, you know, mortgage rates, whether it's lendingtree.com, whether it's one of these others that, you know, put out that sort of information, and to get, you know, a sense of what are the prevailing rates.
Without the rates as much as the volume. Like
Yeah,
monitoring
that,
how much of the arms are being made, how much are 30-year, 15-year, all that.
and you can get that, yeah, probably from Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and all the different sort of government-sponsored or government-affiliated, you know, sort of lenders on the residential side. Just going to their websites. Okay, moving forward. All right, so we migrate, and we'll finish up another example here of this interest-only thing. So the example that I think I used here, let me sort of see here. Okay, so another way of flipping this around. All right, so give me an interest rate for an interest-only mortgage.
Slow.
8.9.
8 point, I think some weird numbers. 8.9, okay?
The interest are always high.
Okay, no, this is it's a weird combination, okay. 8.9. All right, so 8.9% is going to be our interest rate. All right. Now, in this particular case, let's say we want to kind of approach it a little bit differently, and we want to go with it as if we want to know what our monthly payment is, okay? So give me a monthly payment. $2,500. Okay, so $2,500 is going to be our monthly payment. All right. And in this particular case, we don't actually even, here's the thing, with interest-only mortgages, the term doesn't matter. Okay? That's weird to say, but it doesn't. Because your balance is always going to be the same. Okay? But what we're trying to do here is say, okay, well, if we've got a fixed interest rate, and we've got a monthly payment, what we can do is as follows. We can take that monthly payment, the $2,500, multiply it by 12, yep. So it's going to give us $30,000 a year in interest payments. Okay, but that's the only payment that you're actually making because it's interest only. Okay? So there's no amortization that's taking place. Everybody with me on that? Yes or no? Okay, so using that, if that's the interest rate, then to find the value of the loan, all you're going to do is take that amount of interest and you're going to divide it by the interest rate. And that's going to give you 337,078.65 as the loan amount for interest-only mortgage, okay? And this is where you're